All right. Thanks everybody for joining us today for our July 6th, 2020 regular council meeting by Zoom. First, we'd like to start by saying that we are streaming or Zooming on the traditional unceded territories of the Comox First Nation. And I'm just going to start with a preamble regarding COVID-19. Due to the COVID-19 coronavirus emergency, the City of Courtenay, with authority of Ministerial Order number M0192, Local Government Meetings and Bylaw Process, COVID-19, Order number 3, has implemented changes to its open council meetings. In the interest of public health and safety, in-person attendance by members of the council meetings will be prohibited until further notice. Council meetings will be presided over the mayor or acting mayor with electronic participation by council and staff. Meetings are available for viewing via live web streaming or video recording on the City of Courtenay website, and will start at 4 p.m. during this period. All right. With that, we can start with our adoption of minutes.
I'll move adoption.
That was supposed to be me, move adoption. Yeah.
I'll second that.
Sorry.
Excellent. That's okay. Councillor
Slow on the button.
It's all good. That's what happens when your last name is first. Councillor Hilly, do you want to speak to the minutes?
Yes, Mayor, I believe on page 9 of the minutes in the resolution related to the Connect Warming Center, in the second paragraph, it indicates that the lease expiring June 30th be temporarily extended until the 31st of August. And I believe that actually was to the 30th of September. I believe that was the wording, and it's mistaken in the minutes. So I would request that it be amended in that regard, if I'm correct.
All right, thanks very much. And Mr. Royster, I think you are ready for that correction. So thanks very much. So on receipt of the minutes as amended, are there any other further comments or questions? Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have one other slight clarification under my report, which is, oh, I had it written down, but anyway, under my reports, where it discusses the UBCM resolutions, there's just a slight wording change where it should say, instead of farmers market associations be included in future emergency planning, that should actually read food security rather than farmers market. It is correct in the other resolution with farmers markets being considered as essential services. So just a slight correction there, and I did send that to Mr. Richa, so hopefully that makes sense.
Excellent. Thanks very much. All right. Any other corrections or alterations to the minutes? Seeing none, it is just minutes, so I'll assume that they are unanimously received unless somebody waves their hands furiously. Introduction of late items. I don't believe there are any. If there are, so moving right along, moving into delegations for integrated regional transportation.
You're gonna kick it off, Dave?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. Sorry. Sometimes we get confused whether we're receiving stuff or not, but I
think we are receiving the delegation and everything 3.1 and 3.2.
I'll move that I receive myself as the delegation.
I'll second that.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor McConnell. Over to you, Dave.
Yeah, thanks. That was touch and go. Thanks for having us today, fellow council, and thanks to staff for making room for us. Obviously, most everyone knows who I am here today, but for those who might be watching elsewhere, a councillor in Courtenay, director on the RD, and last term I was appointed as the chair of the interregional select committee for transportation at the regional district. And we also have with us here today Angela Holmes, who is the vice chair of the IRTSC, and she has a long history with active transportation in the Valley, including with the school district. And we also have Alana Mulally, who's the senior manager of sustainability and regional growth and strategy and planning at the regional district. So our purpose here today is to introduce you to the idea of working together on regional transportation, specifically active transportation, and to explain the vision of this regional transportation memorandum of understanding. We want to request feedback on the MOU from council and staff, and ultimately to seek your support and participation in the process laid out in that MOU. So at this point, maybe we'll take the next slide and pass it over to Angela for a bit of history on how we've arrived here.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody, and everybody out there in YouTube land. My name is Angela, and I'm just happy to give you a brief background of some of the successes we've had regarding active transportation. So really beginning formally in 2011 with the Comox Valley Cycling Task Force, which was really a community movement where the aim was to tie the community together. So we had excellent uptake from all our municipalities, including the councillors, mayors, and staff, participation from senior staff at our school district, also the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition, Island Health, RCMP, our fire departments, MODI, and Active Comox Valley. The committee was chaired by Rona Ray Leonard. And some of the great works that came out of that was the 8 to 80 movement. We had Gil Penalosa come. We partnered with the newly formed Cycling Coalition. We had Earth Day celebrations that were organized. We also organized a Go Smart Day. We did a Bike Lights to the Homeless campaign. We also did Bike to Work Week, which was some coordination and celebration stations happening. We had successful grants to fund a cycling task force coordinator. We also had a giant success with the school travel planning pilot project. The city of Courtenay did contribute funding for that initial pilot project. Data that was gathered from that pilot project helped create best routes maps to Puntledge Park School. And also the data from that contributed to the Vital Signs report, as well as the City of Courtenay's Transportation Master Plan. We also created best routes maps and some walkabouts where our engineering staff from the City of Courtenay, as well as MOTI and the RCMP participated. So there was a great community collaboration happening right from 2011. And then it evolved into our Go Smart committee. So we were trying to pull the focus away from just cycling as a transportation, but how can you actively transport yourself? So that's where we evolved into our Go Smart committee. And again, we had great support from municipalities during that time. And it was able to represent all modes of active transportation. Then we had our terms of reference drafted in April 2015 for that group. And then that helped us evolve again into the Integrated Regional Transportation Select Committee, which is where we are now. So that committee was hosted by the CVRD. And we had, again, elected officials, agencies, and partners representing, including members of the public on that committee. Yeah, so that's a brief background of how we got to where we are today. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And so just to summarize that, when we were asked to put that IRTSC together, we had that dual mandate of looking at the Dyke Road and how we could work together, all the municipalities that were involved in that, to come up with a solution for the Dyke Road and active transportation. And the second part of our mandate was to look at how we could continue doing work like this moving forward. So if that other projects came up, you know, whether they were educational or advocacy or larger infrastructure projects, how we could, where we would do that and how that would work. So through those deliberations at the Integrated Regional Transportation Committee, we decided that, in fact, the regional growth strategy was the perfect place for this to live. If we could get maybe just a couple slides forward there, Elena, is that possible? Maybe slide 3, because I know we have, or no, I can just wing it. I don't need to see it. But in particular for Courtenay, there are a few reasons. Actually, sorry, we're on slide number 3, which is why, and that's maybe there's some obvious answers for this council, but for the benefit of others, we all realize that there's great health benefits to using active transportation instead of using our cars to get around. A lot of people, of course, can't drive cars, such as young children, people who are older might have issues, people with mobility issues. There's also benefits to our healthcare system, and that's, economically speaking, we spend a ton of money there. So if people are more active, they're less likely to be using the healthcare system. We have equity for those who can't afford to own a vehicle to drive around. And then we have issues with, of course, climate change and the environment. And something that really affects Courtenay is, we're sort of the center of the valley for a lot of services, and we get a huge influx of people. And so every additional car that comes into our city, we have to provide the infrastructure for, and that's a massive cost for us, as you all know. Moving on to the next slide. Is that possible, Anna, to get I was just about to pass it off to you, Anna, but I was going to mention one more thing. And there are a few projects that I have in mind to sort of warm up people's imaginations. And the big one right now, of course, that we're working on already is the Dyke Road. But you might realize that a lot of people travel between the regional district in Courtenay and also Cumberland and Courtenay. And anecdotally, there are lots of people who ride their bikes, and especially their electric bikes or their electric scooters, between Cumberland and Courtenay right now. And we don't actually have a proper active transportation corridor. And so that's something that we might look at down the road, among other really interesting ideas. So if Elena, you're okay, I'll pass it off to you for slide number 4 there.
Thanks very much, Councillor Frisch. I have no idea what slide number this is.
Oh,
so
yeah,
hopefully...
yeah. Is it possible to forward the slides at all on your end?
I can do that. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
So
if you could just.
As Councillor Frisch noted, building on the second part of the IRTSC's mandate to think about future steps, this MOU has been developed. And really, the MOU is intended to serve as a framework to reaffirm the cooperation between each of the signatories to work together to implement the transportation-related objectives of the regional growth strategy, and to advocate as a partnership for an integrated regional transportation system. The MOU, I should note, doesn't commit any of the individual parties to specific actions or financing. Rather, it really just is that agreement to carry on together and to work together. The MOU is based on some key principles, including the principle of local autonomy. So suffice it to say, there's no intention here to delve into the nitty-gritty within any singular jurisdiction. Rather, it's to think about the pinch points. So Councillor Frisch has referenced that connection between Cumberland and Courtenay, crossing through electoral area C. How do we deal with some of the pinch points with multiple jurisdictions, multiple levels of service and standards to sort of deliver some of the active transportation network pieces, for example, that our public expects? The second principle is a recognition that a complete and a balanced transportation system offers significant co-benefits. So some of those points that Councillor Frisch, highlighted previously. So equity, principles around equity, public health, reduced congestion, reduced GHG emissions, etc. The MOU is also based on recognizing active transportation as a subset of multimodal transportation that is linked to so many of the other objectives that we have in our regional growth strategy, and then that each municipality has within its official community plan. And then finally, the MOU is based on a principle of coordinated planning, essentially knowing that the key for creating those regional connections for both functionality and in terms of financing, is a really important base from which to work together. As both Angela and Councillor Frisch noted, the IRTSC recognized the Regional Growth Strategy Service as a good home for this work. And so you'll know that service is funded by all 3 municipalities and all 3 electoral areas as participants. The board approves a budget annually for that service, and there are staff resources assigned to that service. You'll also know that there are 2 sort of staff committees, being the Technical Advisory Committee and the Regional Growth Strategy Steering Committee. And it would be within those staff connections that we would be able to individually advance projects through our organizations. Some of the tasks or services that might be provided through this MOU would be things, many of which we're already doing, but to do them in a more coordinated way. For example, data collection and monitoring, advocacy, particularly when we're thinking about projects that we want to elevate to senior government for funding. If we can speak with one voice, even if a project, is located maybe only within 2 jurisdictions, just recognizing the value in speaking together to achieve some regional objectives that will serve our whole public. Other things that might occur would be specific projects. For example, Councillor Frisch has raised a couple of ideas. Angela also referenced the work on past public events. For example, Bike to Work Week, those kinds of event planning. If they were done regionally, this could be a place where that kind of thing could be coordinated. And then in terms of finance, I just briefly said at the beginning, that work would be primarily funded through the regional growth strategy and then certainly through seeking grant opportunities. We wanted to give you a bit of an example of what a potential process could look like under this framework for advancing a project. I'll use, because it's come up a couple of times, I'll use the active transportation piece and specifically a gap analysis project that's on the books for us to complete this year. So for example, if any one jurisdiction through a council resolution, for example, identified a project of interest, that matter or that project could be referred to the technical advisory committee and essentially to your staff. And then we would bring forward a report to the board of directors to seek either direction or funding, etc. And then we would work together at the staff level to try to put a project together and see some implementation. So there's my example. Right now, within the regional growth strategy budget for this year, we have money allocated for a gap analysis on an active transportation network plan. Again, that's not delving into the nitty-gritty within individual jurisdictions' boundaries, but rather to look at the shoulders, those real pinch points where we have one jurisdiction standard meeting up against another, to identify some of the areas, perhaps the low-hanging fruit, where we could come forward in future with some specific projects to address some of our gaps. And then in the longer term, you might know that the regional growth strategy speaks to the value of undertaking a regional multimodal transportation plan. So that could be, longer term horizon project that we work towards through this MOU. That's all for me.
Thanks, Alana. And as she explained, this MOU does provide a way for the participating municipalities and groups in this MOU to advance ideas that previously didn't have a way to move forward. And so we already have a technical advisory committee, which is our staff that get together to talk about the regional growth strategy. So if something comes from the school district or from any municipality, it can move up to the RD where it can be discussed at a regional level with a regional lens, and then move forward from there if it's valid or a time to take action on that thing. So at this point, I guess we're open for questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much. I have a technical question, and I think you might have brought it up earlier, Councillor Frisch. On my screen, it's just showing like the PowerPoint original screen. So I'm wondering if Alana's got dual screens or somebody's got dual screens where one screen is showing the presentation, but we might be stuck on that first slide. Is everybody else seeing that same first slide?
Yeah.
I know, really? Oh, sugar, that's why you're asking me to advance. Okay.
Yeah, and it just dawned on me that you were probably on dual monitors, and of course with Zoom you have to have a super powerful computer that probably none of us have to
yeah
and all that fun stuff. Well, that's okay. But if you look at the other monitor, you could probably just scroll it down and even just click on the things, because it's relatively big anyways. It doesn't have to be full screen.
I'm actually on only one screen. So it says you are screen sharing. Good gracious. I've never screen shared, but way to do it first time on a council meeting.
Yeah, it's all good.
Go big or go home.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we do have some questions. Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks for the presentation, even without the slides. Coincidentally, my son, who's home from teaching in the Far East, was just asking me today if I thought we would see a bike corridor between Courtenay and Cumberland anytime soon. And so I will be able to tell him that this committee might be looking into it, which would be great. I wondered, where would one find out who exactly serves on the committee? Is there a website or a place where the general public can go to see what the membership is?
The interregional or the Integrated Regional Transportation Committee, that one?
Yes.
Well, I do know we do have a part of the CVRD website is, I think there's a page that includes us. I don't know how detailed it is though, to be honest. But I can get back to you on that.
Yeah.
Do you have it there, Angela?
I do, Dave. It is under committees, and under our committee, there are all the minutes from our past meetings over the last 3 years, as well as upcoming agendas for upcoming minutes. And it's all accessible to the public under the CVRD website.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And our committee's been fairly quiet for about the last half year while we've been advancing this this particular MOU. That was sort of the last work we've done.
Excellent. And we have Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. And yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was a great summary of where we're going and what we are hoping to achieve with regional active transportation. I think the approach makes perfect sense. I mean, the only way that we're going to address these gaps is by looking at it from a more regional lens. I don't see how we can solve some of these issues without having a framework like the one that's being suggested here. My question is some of what is being laid out here formalizing how the Integrated Regional Transportation Committee is already functioning, or is there going to be processes and a framework that's different than what you guys have been working on for the last couple of years? Yeah,
in effect, it's completely different because this select committee was put together with just the two mandates. We would meet as a committee, including our partners at the school district and those public members, and we would discuss those two things. But what this MOU is suggesting is more of a fresh start, and it's using the technical advisory committee, which is our staff, in fact, that get together and talk about the regional growth strategy as the new forum. So when an idea goes forward, it would say, like the examples showed, or even with the school district, which I think is a great one. If the school district is like, hey, our kids need this around our school, they can push that up through the RGS. And then we can talk about it at the RD. And then if we need to create a committee like the IRTSC, we could do that, or maybe it doesn't require that much engagement from the public or even the politicians, and maybe it's just a matter of coordinating at the staff level. So it is a different process altogether. Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's a great clarification. I didn't fully understand that. Yeah, that was kind of my only question. And I just wanted to let Alana know that I just opened the presentation on our own file, so I was able to follow along. Thanks. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, that's a good reason for people to send in their presentations ahead of time, just in case, you know, the technology gods are against us that day for some silly reason. So I don't see any further questions at this point in time, but I do want to just say, you know, it's great to see this happening. I know this committee's been running for quite a few years now, and you know, it's good to see things happening. The discussions are moving forward, and yeah, really look forward to some actionable items sometime in the near future. So. With that, I think if there's no further comments, we've all received this. We received the MOU as well, just for information. So unless somebody doesn't want to, we'll assume this is received unanimously.
Thanks very much.
Mano just came on. Did you want to say something, Mano? Or Councillor Theo, sorry. His microphone's turned off anyway, so it's all
Oh,
good.
I'm fine. Thanks, Bob.
All right. All right, with that, thanks very much, Alana and Angela. That was great. Names were all good. And so we'll look forward to talking to you guys sometime in the near future.
Thanks very much.
Okay. Thank you for
Thank you.
having us.
Excellent. On to 3.2, the Lola architecture.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Oh, one second, Erica. Councillor Moran is going to say a couple of words first.
Yeah, I just wanted to move receipt of the presentation. Thank you.
I'll second that.
All right, over to you, Erica.
Okay, I am hoping the technology gods are with me today. Just one
And
moment.
Chantel is going to be speaking as well, I believe. Does that sound right?
Yes, and I'll just introduce, I just want to make sure I can get this up first. And then, yeah, so hello, I'm Erica with Lola Architecture. We're an architecture firm based in Calgary, Alberta, but we also are registered in BC, and our actual home base in BC is in the Comox Valley. So I have a lot of connections here to the Comox Valley, and here with me is Chantel Richard with McElhaney, also in Courtenay, BC, to speak about anything regarding kind of transportation, parking, or services for the site, if there are any questions. So we're here to talk about a new mixed-use development that we're proposing on the Whistle Stop site. So at the north corner of Mansfield Drive at 2355 Mansfield Drive. So I think you guys all know the Whistle Stop. It's been in operation since 1976 in the Courtenay area. It has, I mean, an amazing site directly across from the estuary with views over the Courtenay Air Park and views also to the mountains and to the Comox Glacier. And the building itself right now is definitely in need of renovation, and the owner is taking this opportunity to, instead of simply renovating the building that's there, because it does require significant work for a renovation, but instead to build a new pub and a liquor store and incorporate with that a residential piece as well. So what we're hoping for is a comprehensive development that would combine commercial residential uses. So the licensed restaurant and pub on the main floor would remain. And then we'd also have the liquor store would remain on the site as well, with multifamily residential on the top. So basically one floor of the pub and the restaurant as you have it now, and the liquor store, and then 4 stories of residential above. So a total of 30 units that would have views again out to the estuary and then to the mountains and the Comox Glacier. The proposed development actually fronts right onto Mansfield Drive. So creating a better pedestrian experience and really bringing the building to the users and to the people, as opposed to putting that parking lot as the first face of the development. We've moved the parking into the back. We're proposing an FAR of 1.54, so floor area ratio, with 50% lot coverage, a total of 18-meter height, so 5 stories, and then, like I said, really with 0 setback along the front. Main floor, the building areas are here in the document for your review, but basically a total gross floor area of 4,300 square meters. So again, on this site, as we said, we're pushing the development right up to the corner, right up to that street edge to really engage with people and give a better face to the Whistle Stop with along Cliff Avenue. So as you're turning that corner of Cliff onto Mansfield Drive, so you can really get that view of the Whistle Stop and the new development, with access to the pub right off of Mansfield Drive to the north, but then also off the parking to the south. So again, like I said, we've tucked that parking in along behind, and then put that site access further down Mansfield Drive just to create a better pedestrian and kind of public experience as you're walking along that corner. So it means keeping the traffic away from that corner and keeping it more pedestrian friendly at that side. As part of this development, it would allow for the development of a full sidewalk, boulevard, curb and gutter along both corners of the property. These are following the standards of this city, but also would just create a nice kind of a new development along that corner that will set it up for as new developments continue along Mansfield Drive to really have that same boulevard sidewalk experience, which really enhances the spectator experience. And again, with the site access along the southern portion of the site into the parking lot, that's also where the pub patio is sitting, and that will have access again to the views across the air park and the estuary. Access to the pub, residential access will also be off of this parking lot, as well as the liquor store access. We didn't want to have the liquor store as kind of front and center when you're coming down Mansfield Drive. Keep that more the pub and the residential tower above, but then keep the access to the liquor store tucked in behind off the parking, because people know that the liquor store is there, and when they're going there for that purpose. So not having it be kind of the billboard for the site. Again, landscaped area, just keeping the landscape kind of natural and simple. We wanted to have trees along Mansfield Drive, but just access to the parking and making sure sight lines were good. We weren't allowed to make that happen, but we are incorporating as many trees as we can. So parking, what we're allowing for is for the pub with a 250 seat pub. So 1 stall for every 6 seats, just as per the bylaw, for a total of 42 stalls. Those will be both surface stalls and underground. So I'll show the underground parking in a minute here. A liquor store, we're allowing for 10 stalls, and then residential, so 33 stalls. So 1 stall per unit for a total of 30 stalls, and then 3 visitor stalls. So yeah, on the surface parking, we do allow for 3 barrier-free stalls, and we're also allowing for electrical vehicle charging stations. And then of course there's bike parking as well, areas to look up your bikes. And then moving down 2 levels of underground parking, that the first level is really just all parking, and 23 of these stalls would actually be allocated to the pub. So pub patrons can park down here, take the elevator up or the stair directly up, and then access into the pub. And then there'll also be access here for liquor store as well, and residences. The bottom level of parking is all for the residences. There is some additional storage here for the pub and the liquor store, and then also storage lockers for the residents, just for various storage, often used for bikes actually. Second floor is where the residential starts. So 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, so 4 levels of residences. The 2nd floor has 6 2-bedroom condos and 2 1-bedroom plus den condos. These condos are actually, it would be really great because they have access out to rooftop patios over the pub and views out to the estuary. The 3rd floor is the same as the 2nd, with again, just small balconies. And then moving up, the 4th and the 5th floors have the same makeup with 4 2-bedroom condos, 2 1-bedroom condos, and then they each get 1 3-bedroom condo. So a mix of sizes everywhere from 1 bed plus den up to 3 bedrooms on the site to make up a total of 30 units. Another exterior view. So this is just showing that kind of look from the south as you're walking around the air park. You'd see the kind of the pub in the front with that outdoor patio with a pergola over it, and then the residential tower in behind. Just a really warm and natural palette using dark bronze metal fascias and accents, a light wood soffit and siding, and then dark warm gray brick with some textured brick at the residential front entry, and then maintaining that maroon painted siding of the Whistle Stop Pub and what it's known for now, and bringing that in along the base of the building, just to maintain that consistency in the look and feel of the Whistle Stop Pub. These images just are the colored elevations to give you a sense of each of the 4 sides and just that kind of simple minimal palette throughout. The biggest challenge during construction is that the owner would like the pub to remain open during construction. So the building's actually been designed to be built on top of the existing parking lot so that the pub can maintain operations throughout construction. So the purple arrows here are showing the pedestrian entrance and access to the building. The light purple hatch is showing where there would be a covered access into the building. Orange is showing construction access and loading, as well as construction parking. And right now the blue is showing parking for pub patrons during construction. So we're anticipating this would be about a year of construction to allow for this to happen. And then we wouldn't anticipate the building would be granted occupancy until the existing pub is taken down and that new parking lot is built in place. And once the pub's taken down, the parking's put in place, then the building can get occupancy. And then again, just a daytime view of that feast. So if there's any questions, as I said, I'm here to answer any questions kind of architecturally about the development. And then we've got Chantel with McElhaney here for any kind of servicing or transportation issues. They have completed a full transportation assessment for the site, including a parking analysis that has been submitted along with our amendment application.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Erica, for the presentation. And the slides looked great from here. So that was seemed to go without a hitch. One quick question: when you're on the one screen that had the little lightning bolts,
Yeah.
Was that counting correctly? It sounded like 6 or 7 charging, or is that just like a potential, or do you already know how many 6 stalls there? It looks like that was charged.
So what we're envisioning is actually that this would be 3 charging stations. So in between each of the stalls, and just because we're so far out from when this would be built at this point that we haven't specified the exact one, but the thought would be that each of those 6 stalls would have access to those stations. So having one station between each of the 2 stalls that could be accessed is what we're hoping for there, to provide that electric vehicle charging. And then we also in the parkade are debating how many we would provide at this time, but we do want it roughed in so that it's easy to add it in later. I mean, given that it takes 30 minutes at minimum to charge a car, it's just good business to allow people to charge their car outside the pub to come in. So.
Absolutely. Excellent. We do have a few questions, so I'll hand it over to Councillor Frisch.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Erica. Following on that electric charge station, those 6 outside are for public use, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, there'll likely be some sort of charging for it, so you'll have to swipe a credit card or something, depending how that works. But yeah, that's the intention. Yep.
That's really great, and I really appreciate the attention to those social and environmental details that you brought forward. You know, the densification and infill is an obvious win for us. But the social impacts as well of having some more activity in that area and the mixed use, I think is really great. So I appreciate that. Coming back to transportation, you mentioned some spaces for bike lockup. Do you have any idea of how many spaces you'll have? And I assume they're secured. You mentioned they were in an underground space.
So for residents underground, what we have is a storage locker per resident. So there'd be 30 of them. It's up to them what they want to use them for, but they would be easily used for bikes. So they are sized to be able to fit a bike in them. You could probably actually fit 2.
Yeah, and so I guess when I look at transportation, I sort of use the traffic demand management lens, which basically says that if you provide people with free or included parking spaces for cars, then they're likely to use a car. But if you include paid spaces for other modes of transportation, if you offer them a bus pass or you give them a space for their electric scooter, that's free or included, that really incentivizes that kind of use. And so I'd really encourage looking at that because people have to store a lot of things, and actually you're really close to the ocean, so you might find people with inflatable kayaks and inflatable stand-up paddle boards and so on, where they're also going to have to store those things. So I mean, I would suggest that at a minimum, you have 2 bike parking spaces for every unit that you have. Of course, I'm biased and I have 6 bicycles and each of my children have at least 1, but that's just my viewpoint. So is there another space for bicycles to be parked, or is that it?
Well, there are the outside ones, which we were anticipating would be used for any pub patrons that are bringing their bike, and then those you would have to just lock up yourself. So we do have, I think there's 6 locations for people who are biking to the pub or to the liquor store. And then underground, no, there's really just that the storage lockers, which are sized for bikes. But there's nothing in addition to that.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, electric EV powered bikes are gathering popularity very quickly. I just came back from Hornby Island, and there were 6 of them. All people that you would not call regular cyclists, who maybe hadn't even ridden a bike in a long time. So it's they're going to need space for their bicycles, and you might find that with your close access to downtown, that people would actually prefer to have something less expensive than a car. But thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
All right, and Councillor Warren.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And thank you so much for the presentation. I really like the idea of this, and it's very aesthetically pleasing, I thought. I did have also a question about the EV chargers, which was answered about whether there was going to be public access. So thank you for that. Of course, I'm always the one advocating for food security, as many others on council are as well. And almost every time a proposal comes forward, I ask about whether there will be any space allotment for, I'm looking at that lovely rooftop patio, and I'm just wondering if would that be primarily just seating area, or would there be any space up there for residents to have, a couple raised beds or something in that area?
There is actually, let me see. So this plan, and I'm hoping you can see it on your screen, but actually the idea is that the residents up there would have room for that. I mean, we're allowing for planters right now, and I think there would be discussion with people as they buy them if they would like this planted out with perennials, or if these larger planters that are on the side of each one, if they want to have that for vegetables. I love that idea, and I know that the owner does as well. So if people do want to do that, we are definitely open to that.
That's wonderful, because of course you probably know that there's been a real resurgence in food gardening, and of course when people are downsizing, one of the things that they often really miss is that property for food gardens. So I think that might be a really attractive feature. And just a couple other questions in terms of these would be for sale, I'm assuming, not rentals. And I know in the proposal it does talk about a mix of kind of income or prices for these. Do you have any more detail on what that would look like?
I right now do not. They are for sale, and there is a mix of sizes. That was on purpose. It was intentional just to have that kind of mix of users. I don't know what the pricing is right now. I know that they don't want to price themselves out of the ballpark in any way, so I don't think they'll be super high, but I don't offhand myself know what the pricing is looking at right now.
Yeah, and again, I think that's another thing that we're always looking at is having those options for a couple units that are lower price or whatever, so that it's not just kind of an out of reach luxury kind of proposal. Of course, that's all up to you. I did notice that your company kind of prides itself on sustainability and green building practices. And I did read the proposal, but I just wondered, as my last question, if you had any specific, anything specific you wanted to share about any of those offerings with this building.
I have actually convinced the client that we are gonna we're gonna beat the requirements of NECB for the envelope. I think that's the best thing that you can do for anybody that's buying a new property, is to really beef up that envelope, even if it's just that little bit more so that we can reduce those operating costs, because it's not just the operating costs, but it's just that use of energy. Again, that's very near and dear to me. I mean, there's trade-offs. There's definitely things that are more important to the person that's developing the land. But in this case, they're on board, and we're gonna have increased insulation and air tightness, as well as the higher window quality. So yeah.
It's great. And if you throw some food gardens in there, that will really beef things up as well.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You got another one in there. Good one, Councillor Warren. Councillor,
Maybe not beef up is the right word, you know, kale up or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
fair enough. Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you for this proposal. I see a lot here, which I think is really positive. This is obviously a great location for greater density. It's close to bus routes, close to the Riverway multi-use trail. You got a lot of services that are within walking distance, and I noticed the staff report indicated that we can use existing city services to service this building, so it's a minimal output of new capital for a development which is going to bring in new revenue. So that's just a very positive bottom line thing. And also the impact it has on neighbors, that it's going to maintain appropriate levels of sunlight and sky view for adjacent properties. And I was very pleased to notice the Air Park Association had no safety concerns and otherwise no objections at all to the development. One of the themes I did see coming back in public input was just about the increase in size of the bar itself. But I understand that's going to be coming forth to us later on when the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Board application is made. So while that is a question mark I have in my mind at this point, we're obviously going to address that in a much more fulsome fashion with more information in front of us at a later date. And I guess one question that also came up in this, perhaps something city staff could address in a number of responses by the public, was a request for a crossing of cliff at that location. And I was wondering if that's something that is at all being contemplated as we as we foresee more population density in that area along cliff. So I was just wondering if I could get a comment from staff on whether that's something that is at all contemplated.
I'll weigh in. Thank you through the mayor. I'm not sure if this would be a question for Ian, but also Chantel from McElhaney is here, so may have had some discussion as well with the consultant on this. But Ian, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Councillor Cole Hamilton. It's something that has come up a few times in the past. That section of cliff is a ministry road, so we would need to coordinate with them. And to be honest, I'm not sure off the top of my head whether it's included in the master transportation plan. I remember speaking with the former director of engineering about it at the time, and I have a feeling he said that it was, but without reviewing that plan, I don't know if it carried through and made it. If not, not only the crossing, but I think the movements at that intersection may need some more analysis in terms of both the right out there as well as the left in as you're heading south down cliff.
Okay, thank you. I understand it would be Modi, but I guess that's something we'd work with them if it's part of the plan to develop. And I did have just a small question about the traffic study seemed to indicate that there would be some greater traffic concerns in the future, but they said that the modeling showed that it was no greater than the background level. And I was just wondering if could get a bit more of a clear understanding of how that would be the case, that the traffic would remain roughly the same as the background model without the building. And I guess that would be, I'm not sure who might address that. It would be McElhaney.
Yeah, so the development itself doesn't have as much of an impact on the wait times. It's actually the background, so the additional traffic that we're going to be seeing down cliff in the future, that's going to actually impact the degradation of the higher wait times. So our development, and this is, we looked at it through the lens of this development, has a very minimal impact. However, we are going to see some issues in the future, but it's going to be because of what's going on in the surrounding areas, and that's that traffic going through Cliff.
So am I right in understanding that, you know, this development is actually not going to add substantially to those traffic problems? Those are just something that would arise no matter what. And given the emphasis on, you know, given the location, which allows for a lot of alternative transportation options, this building is not going to be, you know, a contributor to traffic issues in that part of town. Would that be largely correct?
Yeah, that's basically what our conclusions were. It's you're going to have to address it more on a regional level. This is not going to impact that on its own. And you can see that in the difference of when we had an opening day modeled and then an opening day plus 10 years, you see that degradation, and that's more based on what's happening around the development, not necessarily on Mansfield Drive.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. I'm really pleased to see this is not going to contribute to traffic issues in the area, given the various other options people have to get around. Great, thank you.
Exactly, with their bikes and kayaks and stuff, they'll be all good. Councillor McCullum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I think this building looks great. It's nice to see some variation in the design. It looks like it'll fit in nicely with the development across the road, and I think the building design is a lot more interesting than some of the other bigger apartment buildings that we have in town, and I think it looks great. I do have some concerns around the expansion of the pub, and not mostly from reading the commentary of the neighbors. And one thing that I noticed is that there is an entrance both on the parking lot side and on the side facing that building. And we've definitely on other applications in the area had the neighborhood comment on just the impact of the pub and how late it is in the patio. And it looks like the patio is going to be a little bit further away than the existing one. But I'm wondering if it's necessary to have an entrance on both sides of the building, and if that's something that may change as this process goes along.
I think that I think the main reason for the entrance on both sides was actually about that pedestrian engagement, and we didn't want to have Mansfield Drive and that pedestrian link fully closed off, knowing that many people will be parking in the parking lot and want to walk directly into the pub that way, but we really do want to encourage people walking over. In terms of the noise, it will be a fully vestibuled entrance, just to help cut down on that noise. And also there wouldn't be any windows open at night. I mean, we did purposely tuck the patio to the pub around that corner and use the building to shelter the residents that are directly across Mansfield Drive from that patio to help cut down the noise. What I have heard from residents that live across the street when we had our public open house, a lot of them said their concern wasn't necessarily actually the pub and the noise from the bands playing at the pub, which is what I was expecting, but they said it was actually the people in the parking lot. And you know, motorcycles coming and going, or people congregating in the parking lot afterwards and just talking really loudly, and that was more the issue. I think that in tucking the parking behind the building and using the building to shelter those residents, that actually will help with that situation. But yeah, I think that not putting an entrance along that northern part of Mansfield Drive will really close the building off to any pedestrian traffic along that side, although I imagine that the majority of people who are driving will actually be using that access to the south.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And I that same thought did occur to me, that a lot of the commentary we've had in the past has been about the parking and people coming and going. And I did notice right away that it is on the far side of the other residential area. And I do think that's a wise decision. So I'm happy to see that, and overall I think this proposal looks great. I have another question that's more about the traffic as well. And I see that the recommendation is to lower the speed limits to 30 kilometers an hour and move the crosswalk away from the corner. Is that correct?
So yeah, I'll let Chantal speak to that, but the recommendation is to lower the speed to 30 kilometers an hour. And just to note that that was regardless of whether or not the development was built, because even if you review the access in and out of the existing whistle stop parking lot as it is right now, it should be at 30 kilometers an hour and not entering a 50 kilometer an hour street, because that existing crosswalk and corner right now is quite blind to anybody coming down Mansfield Drive. They wouldn't be able to see if somebody is crossing and stop in time if they were going 50 kilometers an hour, which I don't know that it's actually possible to do at 50 kilometers an hour.
Maybe on a motorbike.
maybe, if you're really leaning into it.
Yeah, that's right. It was an existing deficiency that we noted in the traffic impact study. So it was something that we noted should be changed either way. But yeah, probably not. Nobody's going 50 kilometers an hour.
My follow-up question to that is whether or not there was any other design changes that were noted that would help like encourage traffic to slow down to that speed, because that's another comment that we've had brought up fairly regularly from the residents in the building across the road is that speed along there is an issue. And I did note in the staff report that there's a desire from the applicant to have some of their amenity contributions go toward that improved crossing. But I'm wondering if there's additional design changes that we could look at that would also help slow cars down in that corridor.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't specifically look at that, but there are traffic calming, there are devices that can be used that you could look at in that area. It just wasn't something that we pursued while working with staff on the rezoning. It certainly could be looked at.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Theos.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really like a few of the components to this project. Definitely the aesthetics is one, and the details involved in the parking and the electric vehicles, etc. With the rough-ins, especially, very foresighted. The one that I really like, on top of all, is the fact that this is a commercial residential mix, and that appeals greatly to me. My question is in regards to the buildings across the street. Will this new proposal affect the sight lines from those buildings that are across the street? And if so, how dramatic would that be?
In looking at it, I don't have a diagram that we had done, but there's 4 towers that are across the street. So the tower that's in the southwest, some of the units there will lose a part of their view. However, there was one of the residents that lived across there that came to the public hearing and said that he's already losing his view anyways, just from the trees. So he wasn't too concerned about it, but the siting of this building, and it won't affect 3 of the towers, and it will only be lower units on the 4th because of the change in grade. Those buildings are higher up than the whistle stop will be. So it just affects kind of that 4th building. I don't know if that helps.
All right.
Yes, thank you very kindly. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah.
And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again. And I just wanted to loop back to the transportation piece. The reason it's so important, as you're hearing, is that even though you are only talking about 30 units, any additional traffic requires infrastructure that's borne by the greater public. And so when we look at putting in a set of lights, they don't come cheap. And I don't know how much MOTI is going to toss in, but I would guess that a set of lights there would be in around the range of $500,000 at minimum. Such a huge road. So yeah, if that crossing of Cliff Ave isn't in our transportation plan, then it's missing in effect, and we should probably work on that as well. It was identified that Cliff Ave, and I know this isn't your fault as a developer. There are very few places to cross it, and a lot of the infrastructure that and the services that people living in this area will need are across the road. So while the Riverside Pathway is an excellent connector, it can be very congested in the warmer weather and weekends and such. And it really isn't the greatest way to get into town if you're riding a bike or even a mobility scooter. It can be quite crowded. So really, what I'm getting at is people that do need to store their bicycles and their electric scooters or mobility scooters, they will need somewhere to put them. So I'm wondering what the dimensions of those storage lockers are.
I don't know them offhand at this moment, but we can send that to you. And like I said, they're large enough for probably 2 bikes. I hadn't looked at it in comparison to a mobility scooter, but we can easily do that. Yeah. Yeah,
and something you might look at is, when you make the parking spot included, it really is, I don't even know if you'd call it an incentive, but once you've paid for something, it's very difficult not to use it. But, if people were paying for the parking spots, it would probably change the demand for them. So I don't know, how many parking spots are you provided that are sort of secure, if you will, in the building that wouldn't be used by the public?
That wouldn't be used by the public. So we're providing 1 per unit. So there's 30 for the residences, and then there's 3 visitor parking stalls. Right.
And so I wonder if there's an opportunity to make some of those spaces for people who need their mobility scooters locked up in a garage, or if they don't have room in their locker because they've got it full of other stuff, which is probably going to be very likely.
Right.
Yeah, so something to consider. But overall, I really like the idea of that rooftop gardening idea, which I think will appeal to several people that live there, even if it's not everyone. I'm sure it won't be everyone. And then energy efficiency, of course, is really high on our priority list. So hearing about that is a definite plus. Thank you.
All right, and I don't see any further questions and comments right now. So I think I'd like to thank Erica and Chantal for your presentation today. Again, I think it is a fairly exciting new build, and looking at how Trumpeters was done across the street, really kind of fits in with that more modern architectural style, but West Coasty and stuff. So it's a good mix. So with that, again, this was just a delegation, so we'll assume that that's unanimously received by council unless somebody waves their hands furiously in opposition. And thanks again, Chantal and Erica. You guys have a great night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to development services, we have some zoning amendments.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that based on the July 6th, 2020 staff report concerning Mansfield Drive, that council approve option 1 and complete the following steps. That council give first and second reading of zoning amendment bylaw number 2977 to create a new comprehensive development 28 zone and rezone the property legally described as Lot B, Section 66, Comox District Plan 28292 from C2 to CD 28, and that council directs staff to schedule and advertise a statutory public hearing with respect to the above referenced bylaw following the resumption of regular council meetings upon approval of alternate process, and that final reading of the bylaw be withheld pending the registration of a section 219 covenant on the subject property.
I'll second that.
All right, and I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll turn this over in the next three staff reports after this to Matt Fitzgerald, our Manager of Development Planning. You can summarize the report and take questions from council.
All right, and Councillor Hillian, I saw you had your hand up. Is that just an anticipation? Okay, all right, back to staff.
Thank you through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So I think we had a fairly comprehensive overview by the applicant just before this. So I won't go into too much detail on the proposal, as we just heard quite a bit of detail. I guess just one point of clarification I saw in the presentation there. It did reference an OCP amendment. So that's not the case here. This is just a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone to the new comprehensive development zone. So part of that proposal, staff are recommending that council gives it first and second reading tonight, and that we schedule a public hearing once public hearings resume. With that, I'll take any questions, any further questions that council has.
All right, Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks to staff for the report. Interesting to hear the presentation. And I will look forward to a public hearing. I don't think this is one where it's will be wise to waive it because I think there's a lot of people in the neighborhood who will have things to say and who will benefit from actually hearing those presentations. I did want to ask staff a couple of questions. One related to the traffic study that was presented and the adjustment of parking that has been noted based on, it won't provide the parking that would normally be required based on parking available in the area. I did note that the study that was done in February, and I wonder if we can expect that there would be a lot heavier parking requirements at other times of the year, particularly the summer months when you might expect a place like this to draw quite a large number of people at the same time that that particular street area would be in demand for people accessing the air park and the other amenities of the area. That's one question.
Thank you. Through CAO to Mayor and Council. So I think the parking study concluded the way we've seen most other multifamily parking studies conclude recently, that around one stall per unit is what the actual demand is. So the actual demand is less than what our zoning bylaw would otherwise require. So on the demand side, these buildings or this type of development is only requiring just over one stall per unit. So I don't know that would impact the off-street parking at all, because the building is providing what the assessment has calculated as the demand. But certainly, you're right. If we looked at on-street parking during today, it's probably higher than it was in February.
Yes, and are we looking at effectively doubling the size of the pub? Is that what the numbers indicate?
Yeah, it's approximately doubling. Yeah.
So so don't we have concerns about where all those folk are going to park if it fills up, particularly in the evening?
Yeah. So as proposed, the restaurant use is for the pub use is required to have 42 stalls, and so if you reference the table on table 1 on page 28 of the report, you can see the breakdown of what's provided, both in the parkade as well as in on the surface stalls.
In your discussions with the proponent, is the size of the pub a game changer for them if it isn't approved at that size? I'm just referencing some of the concerns that have come out of the neighborhood that we've been made aware of.
Yeah, for sure. So through CAO to Mayor and Council. So that is as we talked about, or as we talked about during the delegation, it would be a future approval that would be required for the referral from the the province to be submitted to the city, and then that same referral would come to council and ultimately be advertised to the public. So there is the risk there that that wouldn't be a successful proposal. But I would say that as the zone has been created, there are alternatives in that case. So if a pub wasn't possible, retail is another potential use that could be substituted.
Thanks very much. And just one final question. The amenity contributions that the city would receive if this development goes ahead, can you give a ballpark amount of what those would total?
Yeah, so as proposed, the applicant is deferring to the OCP policy, which and Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe is $1,000 per unit to the affordable housing fund, and then $1,000 per unit to the Parks and Recreation fund.
So that
yeah, just sorry, just to clarify that, it depends on the final unit sizes. So there's a graduated table with larger sizes paying more.
Thanks. What I was wondering, several councillors alluded to the concerns with traffic in that area, and particularly the access to services on the other side of Cliff Avenue, which, as we've noted, is a Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure responsibility. But it's becoming a concern of mine, as it has been for some time, that we're increasing the population density on that side of the road without necessarily increasing the opportunity for people to cross. And I'm wondering whether the amenity contributions could potentially be used for some type of overpass in the general area that would enable people to access the Driftwood Mall for their shopping via perhaps a more effective walking route.
We say out to Mayor and Council that a facility like that may qualify under the Parks and Recreation amenity funds, but I don't think the amount that we collect through this development would be enough to pay for something like a pedestrian overpass. I think again, like what was alluded to before, it's kind of a bigger question that has to be asked and answered, and then ultimately funded.
Okay, thanks very much.
Excellent. And we have Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks again. So I guess a question for staff, if we wanted to get more of a response on the biking parking, could that come after first and second reading from the proponent? Would that be something we should ask for in particular?
Yeah, I was just looking at the drawings while that discussion was going on, and the storage lockers that I see, they look to be about 1.5 meters wide by 2 meters deep. We could get the precise dimensions of those stalls and probably just circulate them to the group.
Yeah, well, that's, to be fair, Matt, that's kind of what I expected, a typical locker size, and I think most people would think you could fit 2 bikes in there. But once we get to the electric bike revolution, those bikes are much heavier and they are a little bit bigger. And so squeezing 2 bikes into a space that small does get challenging, especially considering that we have more things to store than just our bicycles. If we had to fit our car in that space, it would be challenging to live. So yeah, I would definitely, it would be a bit of a hiccup for me if there wasn't some dedicated secure bike lockup. I'm going to suggest that most of these units are going to have an electric bike in the next 5 years, and some of them will probably have 2. So it's definitely a consideration. And when we look at the sort of infrastructure we're going to have to support, if people decide, well, that's not convenient and I'm already paying for a parking spot, then that's going to be very expensive as well. So we really want to encourage people to move away from the private car, especially since we're going through all the trouble of infill in such a wonderful spot that's accessible by bicycle and walking and mobility scooters. Not to be forgotten, a lot of these people might end up using mobility scooters. Thanks.
All right, and Councillor McCullum.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to staff for this report. I also just had some more questions around the design of the street and handling better pedestrian safety, and how more residents are going to fit in that neighborhood, and what the city's role in ensuring that equates to a better quality of life and better living conditions for not just the residents going into this neighborhood, but the other ones that are already there that are being impacted. And I am looking at the amenity contribution, and I personally agree with the developer's desire to want to see his contribution being spent in the area that his development's going in. Although I'm curious about the use of it specifically for the pedestrian flashers. It would seem to me that if that's a requirement of getting the development in, that should be funded in addition to an amenity contribution, rather than kind of using an amenity contribution for an identified improvement that's necessary for this development to work. And I'm just wondering if staff can comment on that, if that's something that's been done in the past, or if that's a unique request with this proposal.
Through CEO to Mayor and Council. So I guess just to clarify the amenity contribution, the flashers and the changes to the signage would be requirements of the rezoning. And then outside of that, you would have the contributions to the two amenity funds set at about that $1,000 per unit contribution amount. Other things that are mentioned, like the improvements to the frontages, those don't count as amenities. Those are separate requirements that the city would require either way. I hope that clarifies.
Yeah, sorry, my dog's barking in the background, so I thought I should mute myself while you're talking. Yeah, the other thing that raises some concerns for me is just, we're going to need to put, like the applicant will be putting a proper sidewalk in front of the development, as there's going to be basically no setback there, which I think actually looks a lot better for a building like that, and I think it's a good decision. But we don't have sidewalks to meet them, as far as I can recall, although I can't picture that part perfectly. So it seems to me that then becomes up to the city to kind of tie into, and then as Councillor Hillian was raising that, we do need to see some crossing improvements on Cliff. It was identified in our transportation master plan, and this just kind of highlights this area's overdue for improvements. I don't necessarily agree with the suggestion of an overpass. It's my understanding that that's kind of a last resort for pedestrian improvements, and they're not well used, but a crossing of some type I think is necessary. And I wonder if there is the opportunity here for us to look for some contribution from this development to getting some of those amenities funded in addition to the park's contribution. And because it seems to me that what's in the proposal right now is kind of the bare minimum that's set out by the OCP. So that's just the only other comment I wanted to make. And I'm not sure if there's really a question there, but that's kind of where I'm at with this right now.
Okay, thanks. Ian, Mr. Buck, did you want to respond?
Yeah, thanks very much. I think it is an option to add that, but we'd want to have a good discussion with the Ministry of Transportation first. As this discussion's been going on, what I do recall, and it goes back probably 5 years now, 4 years, when BC Transit was doing the frequent transit corridor. That was part of the discussion for this area. And I do believe at that time, the ministry felt that crossing at 26th or 29th was possible for residents of this area. They didn't want to add another interruption along Cliff, which carries high volumes of traffic. I do sort of agree that an overpass as a last resort, gets quite costly and may not work well here. But we can certainly ask the question of the ministry whether they'd be supportive or not and what that would take. how that aligns with the timing of this application. It could be a while before we get to a public hearing, but definitely something worth exploring. The other thing that you'd mentioned earlier is the traffic calming along Mansfield. That could be another, in addition to reduction of speed, which the idea there is pulling back the park zone that's further down. So we'd bring that back around the corner. And we'd have to look at the design elements of it, but maybe possible to do the crosswalk bump outs there, which have an effect of slowing traffic. But from a engineering design perspective, we'd want to see how that works with the curve there first.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Buck. Both of those sound like good starting points. I appreciate that.
All right, and Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll just begin, I guess, by echoing a couple of points, and I agree with Councillor McCollum. I think that working with Modi to see if we can get, as I mentioned before, like a crossing of Cliff at that point would be, this development will only increase the need for that sort of crossing, and I think it's something we need to focus on. And also echo Councillor Frisch's point about the uptake in e-bikes and the need for the kind of storage for if you have 2 or 3 people living in one of those apartments that may well have a bike apiece. And with e-bike sales increasing at 50% a year, that seems like something we should probably be counting on. And the traffic study seems to indicate that congestion will be worse there. So I think people are probably even more likely to choose a bike over a car if they're choosing to live in this location. So planning with that in mind. And the one question I was going to ask, though, was I believe that the 6 electric vehicle parking spots, those were roughed in, but not actually installed. Is that correct, Erica? Not sure if you're still there.
Yeah, I am still here.
Okay,
the intention is that the surface ones would actually be installed.
Okay, so all 6, I missed that earlier. All 6 of those will be installed at the outset?
I think we're still looking at what that would mean and what types are out there, because the technology is always changing. But the hope would be that we could actually have them straddle 2 stalls. So you're really installing 3 kind of boxes that could be accessed by those 6 stalls, if that makes sense. But again, I don't know what type yet. We're still into that research. We're kind of hoping to get through this rezoning piece before we kind of delve any further into additional costs right now in terms of that research. So
yeah. Okay, well, I'd just like to voice support for putting in all 6, and I think given you were talking about having charge for charging, so that the owners will be recouping the cost of electricity, and I think it's a way of bringing residents who are increasingly using electric cars and visitors who need to stop and charge up while they get a good meal. It's a way of it's just a sensible business move to be providing those. So I'm really encouraged to hear that you're considering up to 6, and I'd encourage going with the 6. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just jump in real quick, just because there's a lot of discussion about electric bikes, especially in these storage units, which begs, just from a logistical standpoint, possibly having outlets in them, which some storage lockers or most storage lockers don't have traditionally electrical outlets. So that might be just a technical thing to possibly think about as we have this discussion. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, very astute, and all the more reason to dedicate a space for them. I was going to put a little bit of weight behind this cliff crossing dilemma because it's so important. You can't cross cliff anywhere between 26th and 20th, I believe, or 19th, so it is quite challenging. And so I would also like to see some attention given to that. And I of course realize that we're talking 30 units on a road that has thousands of cars go through every day. So it's not really, shouldn't really be straddled or taken responsibility for by this development solely, but I really think that should be incorporated into the plan, whether it's, partial compensation or at least a movement in the right direction to get those people to cross the road. One of the greatest places to cross actually would be where Fitzgerald actually ends. I think there's an offshoot of Fitzgerald that goes right to Cliff Avenue, and that's a great connection to our cycling network plan. So it would be really interesting to hear if MOTI would like to work with us on something like that. Other than that, again, I really do love the development and hope we can find some support for it. Thanks.
And Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just also wanted to bring it to add support to the cliff crossing, and I'm thinking about when Modi maybe had that preliminary, those thoughts, maybe didn't anticipate at that time how much busier this area was going to get, and with our Riverway trail expansions and hopefully just a lot more action along there, I think will create some issues. I know that we have had some folks hit along that stretch, some pedestrians over the years. I don't know how many, but definitely 2 or 3 that I recall over the last few years. So people unfortunately do take chances and dart across the road, excuse me, and they don't always want to walk, several blocks to cross. So I think that is really important. I had a question about the trees, just how many trees were going to be added, because I just love the idea of having more green along there as well. If someone could answer that question, please.
Do you want me to speak to that? Sorry, this is just Erica, and I don't know if I'm allowed to jump in, but I will. So we've got, if I were to go back through the presentation, I believe there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 trees. We wanted to have more, but there's just issues because of the curve in Mansfield Drive there. And if the traffic's going around that corner because it's uncontrolled, people aren't stopping there, and there's no reason to have a stop because it's not actually an intersection, it's just a bend in the road. But so we can't really line Mansfield with trees because then you wouldn't be able to see entering or exiting the parking if there was a car coming along. So we had to take those trees out, but we do have right now 10 allowed for. So
right. And I'm just thinking even on the back side, even though it's more of a commercial area, just any more green that we can offset the concrete with, I think is a good idea, even if it's not large trees, but just as much green as we can have. Yeah, I think is always great. So thank you.
Yep.
All right. Does staff want to add any more comments to that? All right. Yeah, and I'm not sure the protocol either. I know this is staff reports, so but I guess this is what happens when you have the person give a delegation. So they are there to ask questions, etc. Or answer questions. I don't see any further questions or comments at this moment in time. I think we've fairly fulsomely covered this discussion, but I think one of the things that's happened is we've had this much larger side discussion around a crossing on Cliff Avenue, which I almost wonder for staff if it would be easier if there was something that was separate from this development. There are, obviously we're not going to have UBCM this year, but there may still be opportunities to talk to Modi as council as well. So I know we have other projects going on, but this might be something that we could bring to them as part of council. Mr. Allen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to obviously let council have explore the depth of the discussion, but we're missing our engineering section. Our director of engineering. We're missing Trevor Kushner, who's also involved in much of this, the transportation master plan and all of that. Those are the discussions that require, I think, those staff to be present. And it's a separate discussion. It's one that's connected. But yes, I think that's subject of further discussion on that topic alone.
Okay. And do we need to make a motion or anything, or can we just have staff come back at a future agenda and just have it as a staff report kind of thing? Or
Well, I mean, before we get into a staff report, I would suggest that what we do is just make note of it in the minutes that there was a discussion about the need to address these issues and to consider how the transportation master plan may address those. Then it stays on the record, it's transparent. But there's already work underway, I think, and I need to discuss with those other staff about where we're at with that and when would be an appropriate time to re-engage with council on that.
Perfect. That sounds great. Thanks very much. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that this might be a great discussion for strategic planning, but related to this development, it's more, I think, about a contribution to that sort of idea of improving connectivity in our transportation system. So I think it is twofold. I don't think we're going to obviously tackle the whole issue based around this one development, but there is, I think there is a role that this development can play to help us move forward with this issue.
All right. With that, I don't see any further questions or comments, so I will poll council on their vote, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
I'm in favor, Mayor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Thanks very much. And thanks for answering those questions, Erica, and the presentation tonight. Really appreciate it. Next, we have zoning amendment bylaw 2990.
I'll move that based on today's staff report, zoning amendment bylaw 2990, third reading report, 1025 Rhine Road, council approves option 1 and amends zoning amendment bylaw 2990 after second reading as outlined in the staff report, and that zoning amendment bylaw 2990 as amended proceed to third reading.
Seconded.
Excellent. Now I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you. Through the CEO to Mayor and Council. So this proposal is for a 5-story, 118-unit apartment building. At the June 15th council, council directed staff to provide notice that the hearing was going to be waived for this proposal. During that notice period, we did receive one comment on the proposal, which was in support, which I saw was just forwarded to council through email before this meeting. The developer has also requested one minor amendment to the height of the proposed building to address the elevator shaft, which wasn't originally shown on the elevations. And then further to that, to integrate the elevator shaft rather than just being a single projection into the roof line of the building, he would like to have the surrounding units have a vaulted ceiling, so it's a much more smooth transition. And this ultimately results in a increase of the maximum height of the building to 17.7 meters. So what we are requesting at this point at council is that minor amendment to the bylaw is made to increase the height as it's currently listed from 17 meters to 17.7 meters, and that council gives the bylaw third reading. With that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thanks very much. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm just on page 158 of the agenda and looking at sort of a cross section of the building. I guess I just want to confirm that this change in height is, in fact, it looks fairly minor at, what is it, 70 centimeters. So the roof line essentially looks the same, but it's a touch higher. Would that be correct? It's still a flat roof?
Yes, that's correct. It's still a flat roof, other than on the side where you have that jog, where the one section is higher than the other section. So 2 flat roofs, there's just a jog in the roof line as a result of this increase.
Okay, well, it seems minor enough. Thanks so much.
All right, and I don't see any further questions or comments. I know we've talked about this project quite a lot in the past, so I'll poll council on their vote, starting with Councillor Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in support.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. Next, we have the Cousins Avenue.
I move that based on the July 6, 2020 staff report, zoning amendment bylaw number 2992 to allow for office use at 2459 Cousin Avenue, council approve option 1 and proceed to first and second readings of zoning amendment bylaw number 2992 2020. Furthermore, that council considers zoning amendment bylaw number 2992 2020 consistent with the city's official community plan. And furthermore to that council waives the requirements to hold a public hearing with respect to zoning amendment bylaw number 2992 2000 pursuant to section 464(2) of the Local Government Act, and directs staff to give notice of the waiver of the public hearing pursuant to sections 467 of the Local Government Act in advance of consideration of the third reading of this bylaw.
Second.
All right, thank you for that, Councillor Theos. That was certainly a mouthful.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor.
I'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you. Through CAO to Mayor and Council. So this proposal is to add an office use as a permitted use to an existing industrial light industrial complex at 2459 Cousins Avenue. So the property is zoned industrial 2, and this zone currently does not allow office as a permitted use. And the applicant is proposing to operate a insurance brokerage in the complex, which would be classified as an office use. Therefore, the proposal is to add office use as a permitted use to the industrial 2 zone at this specific location. An alternative public information meeting was held in support of this proposal with no comments received either by the applicant or the city. Staff are recommending that council gives the bylaw first and second reading, and that the notice of public hearing being waived is provided. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Excellent, thanks very much. And we have Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to say I fully support this. This seems like an excellent use of this existing space, which has offices, but yet is not permitted to be solely office space. I mean, given the existing office space nearby in Tin Town, it suits the neighborhood well and seems like a step forward for that neighborhood. So fully in support.
All right, and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I had similar thoughts about that particular lot and what it's being used for. It seems to me that it's actually more commercial than industrial. But I'm kind of wondering, the report mentions the importance of keeping industrial lands, and I'm generally in support of this application. But how does the supply of our industrial lands look? Are there a lot of other places in Courtenay where industry can take place?
Thanks for the question through CEO to Mayor and Council. So we don't have a tabulation of vacant industrial lands in the city. I'm sure that's something that is at least being contemplated as part of the OCP review process. But very generally, we do want to make sure that we preserve employment lands or lands for industry to establish. And that's why in this case, we're looking at this as a site-specific amendment. So we don't want to blanket rezone so that all industrial 2 parcels could have office use, because I think there is a need more in specific locations where warehousing or more heavy uses are more appropriate not to mix office uses. So I don't know if Ian has anything to add on the industrial supply.
Well, and it might be for another discussion. I just thought it would be worthwhile to make note of. And I was going to ask this, a lot of these units are being used for what I would consider fairly commercial anyways, where you have a mechanical company or a plumbing company. And so there is sort of an industrial aspect to it. Is that what was imagined when this was developed?
Yeah, through the CEO to Mayor Council, I think the difference there is typically in industrial zones, you'll have a use like a refrigeration repair business, and then they'll have an accessory office. So the business and the operation of the business is the primary use, but there's an accessory office. Where this differs is that this would be exclusively an office. There would be no other component.
Yeah, but in general, of course, all these units would still be useful for that light industrial use if that became more popular and in demand. Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Allen, I saw you had put up your hand. You're good? Okay. All right, well, I don't see any further questions or comments, so I'll pull council for the vote, and with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
Favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. All right, we are ticking along here. Next, we have the development permit for 3rd Street.
Mayor, I'm just locating it in my agenda. I realized I was not there, so just give me one moment unless anyone else has it.
Well, I can swap. I'll swap with you. How's
Okay.
that, Councillor?
Thanks, David.
Yeah, so I'll move that based on today's staff report, development permit with variances number 2005 for 508 3rd Street, that council approve option 1 and proceed with issuing development permit with variances number 2005.
And I'll second that. Thanks, Dave.
Excellent. And we'll pass it over to staff.
Thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So this proposal is for a development permit with an attached variance to facilitate a new house. The proposed house has one component of it projecting into the side yard, or the corner side yard abutting Fitzgerald Avenue. I think it's pretty clearly shown on figure 1 of the report. This necessitates a variance to decrease the required side yard from 4.5 meters down to 2.9 meters. An alternative public information meeting was held in support of this application, with 2 comments received that are included in your council package. Given the narrow lot width and the style of the proposed house, which is very much in line with the development permit guidelines for the Old Orchard area, staff are recommending that the DP with variance is approved. And with that, I'll take any questions.
All right. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I just wanted to show my support for this. This is a single family home going in, and a lot of people would argue that I'm not in favor of single family homes, but this looks like a great opportunity for one, and I'm very much in support.
All right, I don't see any other questions or comments. So I'll pull council for their vote, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor?
Excellent. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, in favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'll be in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. All right. Excellent. Next, we have external reports and correspondence, starting with the letter from John Howard.
Oh, Mayor, did you miss the financial information?
I did. I skipped right over Sophie. My apologies, Councillor Hillian. Thanks for catching that. I'll pass it around.
I'll move that based on the July 6, 2020 staff report, Financial Information Act 2019 Statement of Financial Information, Council approve option 1 and approve the City of Courtenay Statement of Financial Information for the year ended December 31st, 2019.
Excellent. Thanks for catching that. And I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an annual report that's required under regulations, provincial regulations, through the Financial Information Act regulation. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Jennifer Nelson, who can summarize the report and take any questions from council. So I'll pass it over now.
Okay. Thank you through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So as David mentioned, this is an annual statutory report. It's generally due by June 30th of each year, but the province has given us an extension due to COVID. So we do have until August to complete the report, but we're bringing it to you today. Just to note that most of the report you have seen before, up into about page 226 of the agenda. It's really compiled of our annual consolidated financial statements, which you already approved in May when our auditor presented them to you. So really only the new information in this report is identified in pages 227 to 232 of the agenda, and it covers employees and council remuneration, as well as the annual schedule of payments to vendors. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Hillian.
Thank you, Mayor. No questions. I'd just like to acknowledge the stellar work of our finance department during this difficult time. I know we've endured some criticism in the public about the lack of openness of City Hall, but I think under the circumstances, our staff have worked incredibly hard and deserve to be commended for all that they do, including producing this report. Thanks.
All right, thanks. And I think that's a good point. And, you know, quite a lot, in fact, the majority of what staff do is regulatory. You know, I think we do have some pretty outstanding staff that are really just getting the job done. So I too appreciate that and would like to thank them on behalf of council. So I do not see any further questions or comments. I do see Councillor Theos has his mic on, but that could just be because just for the fun of it. So with that, I will poll council on their vote, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. And now we can move on to the letter from the John Howard Society.
Move receipt.
Second that.
I'll second that.
Excellent. Thanks for that. And we'll, I'm not sure if we need to pass it over to staff. This is in response to a requisition that we had. I do see that Councillor Hillian wants to speak to it though.
Thanks, Mayor. I think you said a requisition. I think it was actually in response to a delegation. I do note that we passed a resolution at the last council meeting or at a previous council meeting in relation to that delegation, inviting a presentation from both John Howard and BC Housing. And I wanted to ask staff if we've heard anything yet from our BC Housing contact in relation to this. Because I think we've got a fair amount of information that we've now received, both first from the delegation and on this letter from the John Howard Society. But we did make that request of BC Housing, and I think there are a number of issues that it would be helpful if we did hear from them and had that opportunity to engage in that dialogue.
Okay, Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I think what I'll do is turn this over to Dave Snyder, who I believe has been representing the city from a staff perspective. Hopefully I'm not putting him on the spot, but I'll turn it over to you, Dave.
Now he just has to unmute himself.
There we go. Thank you through the CEO to Mayor and Council. My button disappeared for a minute. And all that to say, sorry, I don't think we have any new contact with the ministry on this, and that is a logical next step for us for sure.
Just further comment, Mr. Mayor, I know that the delegation, which was at the beginning of June, did make a couple of specific requests. But I think that it's appropriate for us to have this full dialogue, given that you know we're somewhat limited in our ability to influence this issue. It is a neighborhood issue to some extent, but I think obviously we're interested in playing whatever role we can to assure that there's a good process of communication. And given that our relationship related to this property is with BC Housing and in us leasing the land to BC Housing for this development in the first place, I think there are a number of parts to the solution which they're involved in. And so that dialogue that we've requested, I think, is important. So hopefully our letter has gone out and we'll hear back from them soon. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. Okay, and that is just for receipts. So unless somebody waves their hands furiously, I'll assume that is unanimous. And that brings us on to the letter from the Comox Valley Cycling Coalition.
And I'll move receipt on that, Mayor.
Second.
Excellent. Are there any questions or comments regarding it? Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So obviously really encouraged to see this come forward to council, and also really encouraged by how much community support there is for this idea of an east-west connector, a multi-use pathway. I'm not really sure whose wheelhouse this falls into at the city. It seems like it lands in our parks plan, but it also is in our transportation plan. And I also understand that there are probably a lot of moving pieces for this. I don't know if staff are prepared to comment, and I'm pretty sure they're not, but would they be up for a request for some sort of a report down the line?
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we, two of the sort of key people, I guess, would be Chris Davidson, who's our Director of Engineering Services, and Trevor Kushner, who's both of whom are not here today. But we do have Dave Snyder, who has been involved from the standpoint of the Recreation Master Plan, Parks Rec Master Plan. I think this is something that's worthy, certainly, of some discussion. As Councillor Frisch mentioned, there are a number of moving parts and pieces. You know, this would inform any changes to the cycling network plan. We've got Modi involved, obviously, with the bypass work that's going to be undertaken. And again, Dave Snyder could certainly provide his thoughts respecting what the what the Parks and Rec Master Plan has to say. So maybe I'll turn it over to Dave just to provide his perspective, and we can go from there.
Sure, thanks, CAO. Yeah, this is an exciting project. It's something that, as we were developing the Parks and Rec Master Plan, we saw it as a major move. We saw it as something that could be a bit of a game changer for the community. And so it's nice to see that interest in the community in the project. However, it's not a simple project that we simply fund and build. It's something that requires a lot of consultation with key stakeholders. There would be private lands involved. There could be a lot of components that would push some of this discussion into a closed session as well. And so, but a report, I believe, would be in order, and it's something that we could put together from both perspectives, the engineering perspective and the Parks and Rec perspective as well. Being that this connection would have commuter benefit as well as recreational benefit. And so, yeah, I suggest that a report is in order.
Well, thanks for that. And, you know, my understanding is that there is a time limit on acquiring this land. And there's also, I understand Modi, actually, when they came to us, they were describing how they were interested in what our interests were with the bypass and whether or not they were going with the full scale intersection at that point or not. So I think it's time we invite them back for that discussion as well. So once we've received this, I'm happy just to move that we get a staff report on it.
All right, and Councillor Moran.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think this is a timely letter to come forward. I'm happy to see all the different folks involved in it. I have to say I have been doing a bit of field research since I got my e-bike and doing my own sort of critique of ways to get around, and certainly having a better way to get from west to east would be great. I find that in West Courtenay, although there's obviously improvements to be made, you know, I can get around without being in traffic and putting my life in my hands at all times, whereas in East Courtenay it seems to be a bit more of a challenge. So yeah, I'd be really supportive of taking a look at this, also considering that you know, it is complex, but seeing what we can do moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm really pleased to see this letter come in, and really quite pleased to see what a broad spectrum of the population are represented by the groups backing it, from the school district to the Downtown Business Improvement Association to North Island College. It's and many others. It's really quite a considerable expression of support for this project. And I think as we consider a 6th Street bridge option, this is really the piece that makes the 6th Street multimodal bridge make sense as a way to get from east to west Courtenay. And picking up on the theme of e-bikes, which has been running through this meeting, as sales of those continue and use continues, this will provide the kind of safe and comfortable route from one side of the city to another, which many cycle commuters are looking at. And now we've got e-bikes, which take care of the problem of the hill. This is just one more piece, which along with the 6th Street Bridge will create connectivity in the city of Courtenay, which will really change the way people are able to move around. So when the motion comes, I believe Councillor Frisch is going to make a motion. I'd be happy to second that for a staff report. Thanks.
Thanks very much. And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I feel like Councillor Cole-Hamilton managed to touch on all the things that I was thinking of as I was reading this letter, and I'm just very pleased to see this letter come forward from the Cycling Coalition and just the broad community support and awareness that this is kind of a gap in how cyclists are able to get around. And you know, like it was pointed out earlier, there are going to be a number of moving pieces, and it's not a quick and easy project to do. So the fact that there's a lot of awareness in the community that it is something that many people would like to see resources allocated to, I'm really encouraged by it, and I'm hopeful that we can see even greater use of the 6th Street Bridge investment by providing better connectivity on the east side. So I'm also happy to support the motion that has yet to be moved.
Excellent. No, it sounds good. And I know there was a comment that Councillor Moran had made about I think possibly cycling in East Courtenay a little bit. Something that I've been doing for quite some time, but actually just recently got really into some of the little back trails, and was talking to Ms. Rista earlier today, who said that we had an interactive map on the city's website, which in fact we do. So I'll be making sure to share that out to folks as I'm taking photos and pictures along the different roadways. So, and it means I don't have to cycle up 6th Street East, which is apparently one of the steeper and larger hills in town. So, yeah, so I just want to really say thank you to all those that have been responsible for creating these pretty nice trails throughout our whole community. So, based on that, I'll get Council, this was just on information, so I'm just going to assume that we've received that information unanimously. And Councillor Frisch, you wanted to put forward a motion.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'll move that staff provide a report on a possible east-west multi-use pathway.
Okay.
And
pretty simple.
Okay, I'll second that.
Mr. Allen, did I miss your hand up there? I just noticed your mic was on and I didn't know if you wanted to speak to this. Oh, now you've turned your mic off.
Oh, yeah, no, I think it's covered off by the discussion, so we're good.
Okay, yeah, I just saw your mic was on, that was all. So I want to make sure I didn't miss something. All right, based on that, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Fantastic. And Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it'd be worthwhile having a subsequent motion to organize a meeting with the Ministry of Transportation so we can better understand what they're looking for from us in the way of their work on the bypass and this possible Tunnel Drive extension.
I'll maybe look to Mr. Allen. I know we have talked to them in the past, I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Allen, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, I'll maybe jump in here. I think the staff report's a good starting point because I think that will come out in the staff report where we're at with discussions. Again, we're missing Chris Davidson, our Director of Engineering Services, and Trevor Kushner. I'd like to work with them and make sure that that is included for consideration in the staff report. But at this point in time, it might be a bit premature.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Allen. All right, I pulled council, so we are now on to the next, which is the briefing note about the Rotary Water Park.
I'll move receipt.
Seconded.
And I'll pass it over to staff. Mr. Allen.
Thanks, Mayor. Again, this briefing note is by and large just for information. It's, I guess, what we would consider a good news story, given all the closures that we've had over the last several months. And what I'd like to do is turn this over to Kyle Shaw, who is here and could speak to the report or to the briefing note and take any questions from council.
Yes, thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, a quick briefing note regarding the Watery Water Park and the 2020 operational season. So staff are happy to report that in collaboration with our municipal counterparts, the town of Comox, we're excited to announce the reopening of the water park for the 2020 operational season. This opening was effective July 3rd of 2020, so just this past Friday. The reopening of the park is in alignment with phase 2 of the provincial restart plan. And we'd ask that the user groups conform to the provincial guidelines as stipulated, specifically around physical distancing and cleanliness. Signage to remind patrons of those protocols have been erected in multiple locations in the park, as well as the washrooms been open for public use at the memorial pool for people to access and partake in events at the water park. Happy to take questions.
Excellent, thanks. And I have to again commend staff cycling around East Courtenay anyways, in all these little nooks and crannies. I saw signs everywhere, so big kudos to getting the information out there about the social distancing. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thank you. I also wanted just to commend staff on coordinating with their municipal partners and in particular Comox, so it makes just so much sense. And of course, I'm very happy that the water park's open for my own personal use or my children more, but thank you very much.
All right. Excellent. And that was just for information. So again, I'll assume that's unanimously received. Moving right along, we have the Ministerial Order 192.
I move receipt.
Second.
And I'll pass over to Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't know if Wendy Searchta is she's prepared the report, so I'll turn it over to her, I guess, to summarize it and can add any support on some of the legislative issues if necessary, to the best of my ability. So I'll turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you. From the CEO to Mayor and Council, this briefing notice to provide Council with information to replace Ministerial Order 139 to give some guidelines for open meetings, electronic meetings, timings for bylaws and public hearings. The most noteworthy is that for bylaw readings, we are still able to adopt in the same council meeting for those under financial statutory requirements. However, we are moving back to the appropriate levels of readings prior to COVID. And for the open meetings and public hearings, council, I know was interested to hear how staff were proceeding with public options. And we have been researching facilities and also following up through IT to ensure that we have the technical capacity to allow those types of meetings. So that is still underway. And we also make sure that we are meeting the risk assessments for those facilities to provide those public meetings.
All right. Are there any questions or comments from council? Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to say thanks for all the hard work around this and keeping us up to date. I did have a question about just how, if things are more comfortable at work for people and people are generally starting to work a bit more in person, or if people are learning to work from home more. I don't know if that's possible to comment on at this point, but how are people feeling about the changes in the what's coming down from the provincial government?
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, thanks again, Mayor. I would say that, we are, because we're focused now on phase 3 and trying to reopen and recover essentially back to whatever the new normal is going to be. Staff are turning their minds to, the different components as Wendy mentioned. So they're turning their minds to what's necessary, how quickly can we do it, keeping in mind the sort of the requirements and the guidance from Dr. Bonnie Henry. My sense is that morale is good. Staff are going to be continue to be involved in the assessments and the reopening safety plans. So we're making progress. We're taking it in a measured fashion, as we've been encouraged to do by the province. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And what I would say is that notwithstanding our collaboration regionally, each and every municipality and local government has its own unique circumstances and has other challenges that we may not have, and we have ones that they won't have. So it's unique to each local government, and so I'll just leave it at that. But morale to me seems to be very strong, and that's because of the staff involvement in the process.
Well, thanks. That's really great to hear, and I appreciate the hard work.
And Councillor McCollum.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks very much to staff for this report. It's useful to see kind of what direction things are heading in. The reopening from phase 1, 2, and 3. Some of that is really easy to understand in terms of what that means when you're out in public and moving through downtown, and it makes less sense when we're talking about workspaces and getting our meetings back to what they were. So I guess and maybe it's too early for this question, but is there any sense of when we can expect some type of update into moving back to some of our regular processes, and what aspects of our regular meeting process or our previous meeting process do we expect to return first? Will it be, the public able to attend or participate, or public hearings, or in person? None of the above.
So thanks, Mayor. So you'll note from the briefing note that, we're to make our best efforts for things like open meetings and electronic meetings. And of course, that's really what we're trying to do, is to determine how we can do it within the confines of the assessments, risk assessments that are being undertaken, and the safety plans which are being developed in collaboration with staff. Obviously, we will be updating, and the briefing notes provide I think a good forum, a transparent forum for coming to council and saying, okay, we're at this stage. We're seeking your support through a policy statement, essentially, to open up the different services, right? And these services are generally grouped. So you'll see things like outdoor recreation was right at the front of the list. Indoor recreation is going to be more complicated and involve more, sort of internal staff challenges, I think, engaging with the public and all of that. City Hall is another example. So as soon as we have what we would consider to be draft safety plans, we will bring them forward to council likely through this briefing note or staff report, because if it requires a council resolution on a policy matter, then that'll be a staff report. But if it's an update on where we're at, sort of just moving along that continuum of opening up, then the briefing note will provide that format.
So specific to our meeting structure though, what types of things are we working on first? Is it going to be public hearings or in-person meetings?
Yeah, so we are working on, we've had discussions at a staff level on, whether or not, for instance, the Upper Philburg would be appropriate for public hearings and for council meetings. We've also been looking, and I would defer to other staff on this, but I don't know that we can give you an update right now. But there are other options there that may present themselves. So we're exploring that. But for example, I know talking to the regional CAOs that the town of Comox is in a much more challenging position, I think, than even we are, and probably may not see an opening of their city hall until perhaps the early fall. We're probably looking at, we have renovations that were scheduled and have been approved through the budget process for this year. It was carried over actually from last year, which they were unrelated to the COVID-19 pandemic, but related to safety improvements, particularly in the foyer area as it relates to staff that are on the front lines. So we see that we will provide an update to council on where we see that going, because I think we can combine the sort of engineering solutions related to the pandemic with the safety, other safety aspects that came before that. And I would say that even though we don't have a date, perhaps early September might be what we would aspire to. But I'd have to leave it at that, and we'd have to have that separate conversation, I suppose, at a future meeting.
Okay, thank you.
And it might be worth noting, and I know that not all of council comes to City Hall on a regular basis, but over the past 3 or 4 months, there's basically been an evolution, I think, of equipment, both in the foyer and even in people's offices, especially the ones out front in the cubicles, and so just kind of keeping apprised that there is stuff happening, I think, on a regular basis to make sure that staff are kept safe and to basically prepare as best as possible. So, Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. Not to belabor the issue, but I certainly share the frustration, I think, of my fellow councillors and staff that we haven't been able to either welcome the public or return to meetings in person. But I think that this is illustrating one of the challenges of the situation that we're in that it's been a lot more difficult to open back up fully than it was to shut down. And as we saw with the issue that we discussed last week about the library, we had people writing to the library and to politicians saying, why isn't the library open if, bars and restaurants and shops are open, not realizing the many, many more complexities that are involved in those types of public facilities. I also note that we're into prime holiday season, and if there's anyone who deserves a holiday after what they've been through, it's our hardworking staff. So I just really look forward to us getting the opportunity in due course to get back to a more normal way of doing business, and we just keep our fingers crossed that we don't find ourselves in a second outbreak and that we are able to continue on with the progress that is being made. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that probably encapsulates part of this conversation, at least, is one of the comics on Facebook and making its way around the internet, where somebody's standing at two doors. On one side is, you know, fiery hell, and then the other side is, you know, never-ending Zoom meetings. And the person's not sure which way they want to go. You know, they're kind of contemplating, and even Minister Robertson Selena, she was chatting about it, just because I mean, this is certainly not what many of us signed up for. Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things staff would certainly like to re-engage with council on is these lunch and learns or staff briefings. I think there's a number of, and that's in person, not just through Zoom meetings, right? So we are exploring that, mindful that there's a number of topics, including things like this, like transportation and the more complex, you know, integrated, I guess, matters, where having in-person meetings is often more productive and certainly less frustrating, I guess, potentially anyway. So we are working on that, and I think it's important that council understand that. And once we've got some more information, then you know, and that's with council and staff. You know, when you bring the public into the mix, it's obviously a bit more complicated, but we're striving to do that incrementally.
Excellent. I don't see any other questions or comments. I think we've had a pretty fulsome discussion on it. And again, this is for information, but again, thanks to staff. And you know, I think going forward, we do have again some opportunities given all the different facilities that we have, and nooks and crannies and rooms and stuff. But it is about making sure, I think, just like first responders, that staff feel safe, and then making sure council feels safe, and again, as we move to the potential of public hearings, that those folks feel safe that are coming to those as well. So with that, again, I will assume unanimous receipt unless somebody says they are not. And we'll move on to reports and updates from council. And I believe we just have one from Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mayor. I just wanted to talk for a minute about a steering committee that I joined. It's an organization called PACE BC, and PACE, it stands for Property Access Clean Energy. And essentially, PACE BC is a group which is seeking to get a PACE program in British Columbia, which would allow people to borrow money on the value of their house and then pay it back over time at a low interest rate and a long amortization period on their property tax bill. And the loans would be for energy efficient measures, retrofits, the installation of solar panels or other alternative energy generating. And it's been implemented on quite a wide scale in the United States and has been remarkably effective. There have been hundreds of thousands of retrofits in the US, which have created over 60,000 jobs. And the primary kind of obstacle is that it requires enabling legislation by the province. Otherwise, each municipality has to basically invent it all on their own, unless you happen to own your own utility, like, say, Nelson. But otherwise, you're in a position of having to do it all yourself, and it tends to have limited uptake, and only big municipalities can do it. So the kind of the challenge there is to get enabling legislation. And we're very fortunately, this group has had some support from Don Lidstone, who's a lawyer who I think most of us are familiar with. And I was very lucky enough last Friday to have a one-on-one meeting with Don, and he committed to drafting the enabling legislation as a pro bono, a free of charge piece of work, a contribution to the group. And so he's committed to having that done this summer. And that is both a huge piece of work to be able to do, and also for us as a group, PACE BC, it's certainly, we had a meeting a week ago Friday with Minister Ralston, the Minister of Energy, and certainly when we were able to say that Don Lidstone was working with us and was at that point interested but hadn't fully committed to doing the legislation, it carried a lot of weight, and certainly Minister Ralston seemed quite interested in seeing how this dovetails with the Clean BC program. So I'll kind of keep you apprised of how it's going, but so far everything's really pointing in the right direction, and we're hoping, well, it's in the hands of it will be in the hands of the provincial government by the end of the summer. But I think that they see it's a it's a win-win-win. It allows for the reduction of greenhouse gases. It's a great job creator. Those kind of retrofits are not things that can be done by people working overseas. They have to be done right here by people in our communities. And it also allows people to, to build the value of their home by installing something of value. And just briefly, one of the problems in other jurisdictions has been that PACE is often only applied to homeowners, so it cuts out renters, and that's a real inequity. And we're very fortunate on the steering committee to have the executive director of the Building Owners and Managers Association of BC as part of the steering committee, looking at commercial buildings and how they can also be integrated so that people who are renting, the folks who own their buildings would have an in to do this as well. So anyway, it's exciting work, and I'm glad to be starting it, and I'll let you know as developments occur. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Cole-Hamilton. I appreciate the work you're doing. I know other councillors are doing it as well. I would actually request, this is kind of directly relates to the conversation mayors had this morning with Minister Selena Robinson with the province's economic recovery task force, and dovetails even into our local Comox Valley Economic Recovery Task Force. And so if you could forward me maybe a little bit of information, we have a meeting on Thursday, and plus Minister Selena Robinson is looking for ideas like this to be sent and forwarded on to her. So whether you do that yourself, I'm sure it's going to get there, but I'd be more than happy to share that with the rest of the mayors and hopefully get something like this chugging through what is sort of a vacuum right now without UBCM.
Okay, happy to pass that along, Mayor.
All right, thanks so much. I do see Councillor Frisch, you've got your hand up as well.
Well, yeah, I actually just wanted to mention two things. One, thanks to Councillor Cole-Hamilton. This is something that Councillor Hillian and myself, and I believe the mayor championed it quite a few years back. And it was challenging because the legislation wasn't in place. And you may have received my email a few days ago, and FCM's, of course, for their call for proposals to look at, to evaluate approaches within the community's local context to implement these programs. So I wonder if Councillor Cole-Hamilton, if that's related, or if that's even a possibility to apply for, considering we don't have legislation at the provincial level.
Mayor, if I may speak, it is related. I actually contacted FCM maybe about 2 months ago to see what they had when I was starting to explore the idea of PACE, and they said that this program is going to be available. It works with whatever is available in the provincial jurisdiction. Like, for example, Nova Scotia and Ontario have different forms of PACE enabling legislation, so it would work with that there. Here, unless you happen to have your own utility, it is kind of a DIY, build it yourself for each municipality approach, and they'll help assess what the options are and how to put it together. But certainly, my understanding is that it's not an easy route without PACE enabling legislation, but they're endeavoring to help assist people in figuring out what the best route forward is. I think for us, perhaps it might be best just to wait for legislation to be available, because otherwise it would be, I think, perhaps more than we have staff capacity to do at this point.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, thanks so much for the hard work.
And I think right now, again, the conversation we had today, which I'll talk about later, but I mean, they're really asking for suggestions to see how we can have the biggest impact as quickly as possible. So again, sometimes things get worked on for a long period of time, and then something like this comes along to help spur it along. So it's great to hear. Councillor Morin.
Great, thanks, Mayor. I don't really have anything new to add. I was going to bring up exactly what you did, and of course, you're the co-chair of the task force for economic recovery, so it makes sense you would bring it up. But I just thought that was a very logical connection to make, and just to note that these are exactly the kind of economic recovery kind of initiatives that make really good sense, that tie into so many different goals that we have, as well as the the recovery piece that's so important. So thanks so much to Councillor Cole Hamilton. Quite a quiet guy behind the scenes, but there's so much going on there with that, you know, we've just got a real asset on our team, and really appreciate all the work that you do. Very modestly, I might add. Thank you.
Absolutely, and again, you know, one of the projects that we did at the regional district a few years ago, and in fact, well, the regional district meetings aren't where they used to be, but on the building right next to ABC Printing is actually a solar panel array that powers the water pump that's right there, and so so that's a nice display. But then, in conjunction with that, working with local solar panel companies to actually do bulk buying. So even for those people that might not qualify for any programs, just the fact that we were able to help coordinate that allowed people to really save money at the end of the day. So without costing government actually any money at all, which was exciting. And I don't see anybody else. Some of my updates, we do have the Economic Recovery Task Force. So we've gone through our preliminary meetings. We're now meeting with having each business sector, because different sectors are going to have different priorities and different timelines. And so making sure that we're able to obviously address those that are on a much shorter timeline and see what government can do for them, whether that's advocating, et cetera. And something like the solar panel idea might be potentially a little bit longer in our planning structure, but still probably able to do that. And then we had our leaders call last week with our MP and our MLA, and again, just really keeping those lines of communications both provincially and federally. And then if there's any ideas, making sure that that information flows up to the respective folks. Locally, I think one of the things that has come up, and we talked about it in a little bit with one letter from the John Howard Society, but just the police chief did talk a little bit about some of the challenges that the RCMP is having and the work that they're doing to deal with the criminal activities. And as we know, they have laid charges on some pretty significant crimes in just the recent history, but still there's lots happening out there. And then finally, the phone call with Minister Selena Robinson today, really, it was unlike most of our previous calls where we're kind of trying to figure out what the province is doing. This one was much more around what are communities of similar size doing to really try to do that a little bit more brainstorming and sharing those best practices. And so, there's hopefully going to be an update that will come out to us because there's a lot discussed, but things like grants for facade updates and as well as grants for PPE, like putting up barriers and that kind of stuff to help really encourage businesses to make sure that they get the proper safety systems in place so they can really open and be as effective as possible. With that, we'll move on to resolutions of council and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So if this gets seconded, I'd love to speak to it. I move that council direct staff to reallocate the $30,000 approved in the 2020 general capital budget for the buffered bike lane painting on 17th Street, Fitzgerald Avenue to McPhee Avenue to be used to fund design work for a protected bike lane for that section of 17th Street. And furthermore, that staff also include in that work the design for a protected bike lane on 17th also from McPhee to Willamar Avenue. Or it's just going to die here on the table.
Yeah, no, I'm seconding it, just looking for the button.
And if I may, just add some clarity, Mayor. Yeah, so obviously this comes out of a motion that was made last year in June to look at our cycling network plan and reassess sort of the standards we're looking for when we're designing those bike lanes. And also sort of the timeline for implementing such a network. This also came up at budget time when the amounts were put in, and a motion was passed for council to then see the design to make sure it was adequate moving forward. So this money's now been allocated just for the design of it, and obviously we're pushing off the implementation of it until we can find the money for it. I think it's really important that we include the whole section of 17th up to Willamar, because it is a major thoroughfare, a major connection if you're riding your bike, and it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me to design half the corridor and leave the other half undesigned, even if we couldn't find the money right away. And of course, I don't have any specific protected bike lane that I'm rooting for, but I'm definitely looking at keeping costs as affordable as possible, as we do with all our infrastructure. So if it's a couple of designs that get brought forward, I'm not sure, but I'll leave that for staff to work out. Thanks.
And Councillor Hillian.
Thanks, Mayor. It is my understanding that Councillor Frisch has had some discussions with staff in relation to this motion, but I just wanted to clarify for the record whether there are any significant obstacles that staff would identify to moving forward with this resolution.
Mr. Allen.
Yeah, I have Kyle Shaw here in terms of some technical questions should they arise. Because he's much closer to what the operating costs are between, let's say, buffered, painted bike lanes and protected lanes. But I think that there's a bigger sort of discussion here. And even though I wasn't around, I gathered that Trevor Kushner and staff, Wendy Stritch, had been working to try and put some slightly different wording, work with Councillor Frisch to amend some of the wording that would broaden the scope of the resolution. What council has right now, of course, is a cycling network plan that stands on its own, but I think there's a desire to revisit that in light of some of the recent work that's been done by the province, that 450 odd page document that has all sorts of guidelines. The other issue is we have an asset management bylaw that requires us to look at the life cycle costs for any of the projects that we do. And that's not a reason not to proceed, but I guess my concern, and I'm coming late to this, having not been part of the discussion previous last week, that there's some capital costing issues when you go ahead and design. One of the thoughts I think that Trevor had was we could use that $30,000 to actually delve right into the cycling network plan and look at it from a much broader perspective. Because in fact, this resolution, at least in my sort of read of it, means that we're actually changing what's in the cycling network plan without amending the cycling network plan. So this is kind of one of these one-offs where, okay, so we're going to do this. When, are we going to do other things? I mean, it's kind of, in a way, it's putting the cart before the horse, in my opinion. I don't know whether we want to get into too much discussion on the technical components, but perhaps, Kyle, you could just weigh in on, because there's the capital costs and then there's the operating and maintenance costs, right? Which in my mind are part of the life cycle costs, because often the operating and maintenance costs are through the life of the asset, often higher than the actual asset itself. And then there's other factors like timing for replacements and maintenance with other co-joined assets. But Kyle, perhaps you could weigh in a little bit if you have some thoughts on this.
Sure, thank you. Through the CAO to Mayor and Council, to add to Mr. Allen's point about asset classifications and consideration for the life cycle costs, some of the preliminary work that was done on 17th Street, not to get too detailed, but the work that was done from McPhee to Fitzgerald, the linear assets were already taken into consideration before the repaving had occurred. equal to that. And the reason why the remaining 400 meters between McPhee and Willamar was not completed in terms of resurface was because of some of those linear assets and their failings. They've already come to full cycle life costs or useful life function and need to be replaced. And so that's part of the consideration in terms of that layering those linear assets one above the other. And to the second point of Mr. Allen's is looking at operational costs and perpetuity for assets. When you're considering a buffered bike lane as it's depicted currently in the cycling network plan, it's a lot less in terms of operational maintenance costs year over year annually than it is from a protected perspective or from a delineated bike lane perspective, almost to the point of a threefold incremental increase in terms of maintenance costs relative to those particular assets. So that, to that end, really, I think the broader question is, and again, to Mr. Allen's point, is if we look at one class or one road section within the CMP, it strikes the nerve, or strikes the question, do we look at it in a broader sense, and are we asking ourselves to revisit more sections or just one in particular, and how do we proceed in the future when we're going to implement the plan or the agreed upon plan from a staff perspective? So clarity on that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks. Councillor Hillian, that was okay. Councillor McCollum.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I certainly take the point that this is kind of complicated by the fact that we have a recent cycling network plan, and this doesn't completely match with what's outlined in it. Although I think that there is value in having a design in place that doesn't provide for more painted bike lanes in traffic. And I mean, this was discussed when we added it to the budget originally, that it didn't need to be, as long as we weren't talking about adding bike lanes beside parked cars, that it made sense to allocate some funds to it. But then, what we're hearing is that unless we're doing design work, we can only have painted lanes beside parked cars, which is why we're looking at doing the design work. So, it's not new information that council doesn't really want to invest money into putting cycling infrastructure in that doesn't improve cycling safety and doesn't make more people more comfortable on the road. So I'm not sure if the best option is to really look at the whole cycling network plan, or just acknowledge that we want to do some design work in this corridor where there's plenty of room for cyclists to not be in traffic beside parked cars. And yeah, I take the point that we have some older pavement, and maybe maybe the timing for actually implementing the design work may be broken into two phases. Obviously, the pavement is of a completely different age in the lower section, but I don't really see the harm in designing the whole corridor at once. I imagine that would probably, in the long term, cost less money. And I guess my question is the $30,000 that we allocated for the line painting, is that more than enough to do some design work in this area? And does this need an amendment made to the cycling network plan? Because I was under the understanding that we could make minor changes without opening up the whole thing and looking at it all over again. So maybe staff wants to comment on that.
Thank you, through the mayor. Well, I guess I had originally worked with Wendy and Trevor to schedule this to come on the 20th when we've got a full complement of staff who are involved in this, both the cycling network plan and also in some of the operational implications that might be related. So I think, my preference would be, and we know already that we're going to be coming back to council, and I think it's August, and I'll defer to Wendy by all means on the scheduling of this, but we had a resolution from council that I believe we're going to come back to discuss the cycling network plan, the request for clarity, I think, that we had out of the resolution that was that Councillor Frisch had brought forward back in June of last year on the cycling fast tracking, I suppose, the cycling network plan from whatever I think the 10, 15, 20 year projections to doing sort of the core. If I may be misspeaking on the terminology, but so we're not at a stage where we can weigh in on this in detail. My suggestion would be to put this off at least until the next council meeting on the 20th, and then we can have all hands on deck to have a meaningful discussion about some of these questions. Staff are not in a position today to be able to do that. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have an issue with putting off the discussion for a week. I don't know how others feel.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor McCollum and Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So, yeah, I mean, I wonder, you know, we do have the Director of Public Works here, and, you know, I think it was apparent that this was coming forward after our last conversation. So I'm a little confused why I'm not a little more prepared to talk to it. But when we talk about linear assets, that's exactly why we should be looking at this design and getting this design done. You know, it's hard to have a conversation unless you're actually looking at what some of the possibilities are. And when we talk about asset management, I think staff tend to look at it from purely an economic standpoint. So it's merely dollars and cents from the perspective that you're giving to us, but there's a social cost that you're not factoring in, and there's an environmental cost that's not being factored in. And it's no longer acceptable to just look at the economic costs. This is the perfect opportunity to do a pilot project. It doesn't mean that yeah, you know, everything has to be exactly like 17th. In fact, this is a way to open up the door and have a conversation about how we want to protect our cyclists and make it more more enticing to use that form of transportation versus car transportation, which in the end actually costs us a whole lot more money on a myriad of levels. So if this has to wait for a week to have the discussion, I mean, I can accept that, but let's have the discussion. Thanks.
Right, and I'm not sure because there's discussion of a potential lunch and learn as well, I think. But Mr. Allen, did you want to respond?
Yeah, well, first, let me say that asset management and staff's perception of that is not completely limited to economic decision making, and that's why council, as council, makes decisions about levels of service and community benefits other than just economics. So I want to be clear about that. The issue of why staff is perhaps not prepared is because it doesn't just involve one director from Public Works. This is an issue that spans several different or a few different departments, and certainly that includes engineering and one of our key members of the senior leadership team, Trevor Kushner. The Lunch and Learn was intended to be a place where we could discuss the next steps in the cycling network plan, and that way we could kind of roll up our sleeves with council to consider the benefits of moving forward on that with that plan in its entirety, using the resources, the $30,000 to assist in that work. So I think there's merit in council having a broader discussion. And by the way, the 20th is 2 weeks away, not 1 week. So I'll just leave it at that for now and wait for council's comments or questions.
And just to clarify, Mr. Allen, if it comes back in 2 weeks or not, we do a lunch and learn to try to maybe unpack it a little bit more. That doesn't necessarily preclude 17th Street from being a pilot project in the future, does it?
Not at all. In fact, that may be the outcome or one of the outcomes. But I think, I think it's important. We've also had the earlier discussion around the Tunner Drive connection, the east-west Courtenay connection. That is part of the mix, right? I mean, that's included in the transportation master plan, if not fully considered in the cycling network plan. My memory escapes me on that one, but these are all, as council's acknowledged, interrelated and not without some level of complication and ongoing community engagement. When you're talking about levels of service, life cycle costing and all of that sort of thing, public engagement is significantly important, and we know that from comments made and experiences in other municipalities. So, I think, from my perspective, while this is well intended, I don't think it's going to get you to where you need to go if you don't have that broader discussion, as I've indicated. I also think that in terms of the lunch and learn, my recollection, and it's subject to verification, I think on the 20th, if council decides to come back on that date to further discuss this, that we need to have that broader discussion just in order to figure out, well, whether or not this is going to fit in and could be a pilot project as sort of upfront as one of the actions that council might want to engage in. But without that broader discussion, I think we're shortchanging ourselves.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, that sounds fair. Would we expect to have a consultant with us on the 20th to explain sort of what the options are and what the province is suggesting?
Well, I think that's premature. I think what we need to do from a staff standpoint, working with council, is to have that broader discussion about how would this go forward. What can we get into now? And especially given I think I wasn't here, but the last council meeting, there was the work plan review, and we have already had to put off, capital projects that have been approved through the budget because of this pandemic. And that's not an excuse, that's a reality. And so having a broader discussion about these connectivity writ large, and changing the cycling network plan and incorporating many of the considerations that will be part of any east-west connector solution is, I think, really an important first step. And again, it's not to delay action, it's more to fine-tune things and to use our limited resources in an effective way.
Sure. I'd just like to remind staff that our cycling network plan was adopted in early January, I believe it was, of 2019, under the expectation that we could revisit it and adapt it because we were looking to get funding by adopting it. And that was further informed in June of the same year when that motion was passed to relook at those levels of service. And then it was again mentioned when the master transportation plan was brought up. And then it was again mentioned to pass a budget in 2020, which did not find a whole lot of support until we made some changes, including this change to look at 17th Street as a way to move forward on a cycling network plan that we find to be very important to our transportation plan. Thanks.
And Councillor Theos.
Yes, thank you. I would have to say that I believe that Mr. Allen has made some very strong points, and I very much agree with his advice and the fact that we do not have key directors at this particular meeting, including the Director of Engineering and Director Kushner, that are very knowledgeable in these areas. I would very strongly agree with our CAO that moving this at least to the 20th of July is a prudent way of moving forward.
Okay. Mr. Rich, I just noticed that your microphone was on. I didn't know if you had wanted to speak, and it may just be on by mistake, so that's okay. Moving right along, Councillor Morin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm just wondering if there's a possible amendment to be able to move this forward, but also take into consideration Mr. Allen's points so that it doesn't get lost. But also, you know, that we can move this forward, but taking into consideration some of the issues that Mr. Allen has brought up. I don't know if anybody has a great suggestion, or if Councillor Frisch has something that he could change in the motion, but I'm just putting it out there that I think that I'd like to find a way to kind of address this, but also kind of find a win-win here. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Councillor Morin. Mr. Allen, did you have a thought?
Well, I think the most expedient and easy solution is just to simply bring forward the same resolution for consideration with all necessary staff on hand for the 20th. That will give staff a bit more time to put their minds to the discussion that what the intention of the resolution that Councillor Frisch is bringing forward. We were going to meet and have a senior staff meeting to discuss this, and it aligns well with the other initiatives that have come forward, including the cycling network plan, and more recently, of course, today, the letter related to the East-West connector. So I don't think anything needs to change. We just need to be given a little bit more time to the 20th. And then we can, I think, have a more fulsome conversation on, you know, the best, whether this is the approach that council wants to support, or whether there's an adjustment to the motion or revision or what have you that would better fit the broader picture, I guess, without unduly delaying action, I guess. So.
Okay, and Mr. Allen, I'm almost wondering, because it sounds like there's some consensus around moving this to the 20th, so that seems like it might be okay for now. Would it be too premature to start discussing that lunch and learn, or just get the planning for that happen? It wouldn't happen before the 20th, but basically trying to pick a day where we do have all of staff, and we could maybe potentially, I don't want to raise expectations, maybe meet in person or by Zoom and have a discussion that's very focused just on this one issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, we have clear directions. There's a lot of work that's already been done behind the scenes on coming forward with a staff report on the cycling network plan, and where council might want to see that go. We were scheduled to bring that forward in August, if I recall from Trevor Kushner's last discussion on this. So, you know, it's part of it'll be part of the minutes. I don't know that you need to include it as a resolution right now. I think we just come back on the 20th. Staff will be better prepared, and there'll be other additional staff, important staff, that should be part of the conversation. And I think 2 weeks is not unreasonable to have I think a better conversation and perhaps outcome.
All right, thanks very much. Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I was just going to mention that if it's a matter of including the work pertaining to the cycling network plan that we're looking at doing, I'm happy to add that into the motion, but my understanding is that would certainly flow out of this, and getting the ball rolling on another section of our streets is really important. And I think that was quite clear back in March when we passed the budget and made the point of including this very project in that. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but last week, Trevor Kushner outlined quite clearly that it was possible to put the money towards design and work on that corridor. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about the cycling network plan. I think it means the exact opposite, that this is a good way to get started. Thanks.
And Councillor McCollum.
Yeah, I'm just going to make the motion that we defer this discussion till the next council meeting on July 20th.
Seconded.
Second that.
All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments on the deferral? Seeing none, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
In favor?
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCullum.
In favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
I'll be in favor as well. Excellent. So this is deferred to our next council meeting. And moving right along, 8.2, Councillor Cole Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Mayor. So I would like to move that council requests staff to produce a preliminary report on options and costs for the 6th Street multi-use pedestrian bridge to assist council in refining the number of options to be further developed. And if this finds a seconder, I'd like to speak for a moment.
Second.
All right.
Great. So the reason for this, I think, was just to perhaps try and reduce the workload on staff and the cost of developing the options. There were 4 that were presented to us back in January when we approved the initial stages of development of the 6th Street Bridge option. And I recall one specifically, the Bailey Bridge, seemed to have very little love. And I don't want to speak for other councillors or for other options, but that one I think seemed to find little support. And that made me think that even by reducing the number of options we're developing further by 1, we're reducing the workload by 25%. Ideally, if we, and I back and forth this with Trevor Kushner last week, and he suggested that this wording made sense to him and that he also thought perhaps a lunch and learn would be a useful opportunity to try and get for staff to get council's opinions on the 4 options in front of us, provide us a bit more information, allow us to ask a few questions, and ideally refine the list down from 4 to 3 or even 2. It just seems that if there are options that are not appealing, it would make sense to get them off the table earlier rather than later, and not to be using up valuable staff resources developing options which are unlikely to find an outcome. So my vision, and as I sort of expressed this to Mr. Kushner, was that the staff report we're looking for doesn't have to be substantial. It doesn't have to be substantially more than we saw in January. In January, we were provided with examples, illustrations, and sort of ballpark costs for each of the 4 different models. And I think if we could use information similar to that to refine our options, I think that would be just a very practical way of proceeding with this project. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Councillor McCullum.
Thanks, Mayor. And yeah, thank you to Councillor Cole Hamilton for bringing this forward. I completely agree with the rationale that we just may not need to invest consultant or staff resources into exploring options that there is no appetite for from council or staff. I'm wondering if a staff report is the mechanism that is best suited for this, or if it would work for simply reviewing the options and having a conversation about it. It seems to me it would have been a great use of a committee of the whole meeting, but you know, due to the changes that we've been experiencing, we haven't had one of those in some time. I'm just wondering if our CAO would like to comment on how this feedback could be best received and utilized with creating as little work as possible for our staff.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to have a fulsome discussion, but the early indications are that this is a good way to approach it. We have something called the discussion paper, which we haven't used very regularly, but that's when you get into sort of more complex options and matters that where you want to narrow down the discussion to get refined direction from council. I think in this case, we've already been before council with some of these options. I think it's probably pretty straightforward whether it's a staff report or a briefing note for discussion. But I think if there's going to be some outcome, a decision that comes from council out of this, then the staff report is the preferred approach, because it formalizes that direction through a council resolution. And in my mind, this is not completely new. So the idea of using this, using a discussion paper is probably not necessary. It's a bit overkill in this situation. So I don't think there's an issue with coming back with a staff report that tries to narrow down these options.
Great. That's great to hear. Thanks.
Councillor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering how the options are narrowed down without our kind of feedback, or you know, how that happens. I mean, there, like Councillor Cole-Hamilton mentioned, there's probably at least one option that we don't have an appetite for, but I guess I think I mentioned in our discussion on the options way back that there are pros and cons to some of the options that could be changed based on changes to design or whatever. So I guess I wouldn't want to be too ruthless with throwing out an option. So I guess I'm just curious how that happens without having a discussion about it first.
So this doesn't, a staff report does not preclude discussion. Sorry, am I jumping the gun here?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, we can still have, council can still have staff discussions or discussions with staff on these options. We would probably, of course, attach the original report that had the options, you know, back several months ago when this came before council. But I think out of that would lead to the discussion that you'd want to have, and then hopefully from there it would narrow it down, and you'd get the outcome you're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and I don't see any other further comments or questions, so I'll go back and poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
I am in favor.
Okay, Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. All right. Moving right along, we have unfinished business. Development permit 1906 at 925 Braidwood.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that based on the June 1st, 2020 staff report, development permit with variances number 1906, 925 Braidwood Road, council approve option 1 and proceed with issuing development permit with variances number 1906.
Second.
And if I could speak to it, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming we will hear further from staff. As everyone knows, this motion was postponed given we had some concerns expressed by members of the public that there was a short notification period and not everybody who wanted to provide feedback had the opportunity to do that. We do have a letter that we've received from one of the individuals concerned, and he speaks specifically to properties owned nearby, residential properties, where the scale of the building will take away a certain amount of those people's privacy to use their yards. And I don't know whether staff's had an opportunity to look at that, but in just speaking to the proposal in general, I wonder if staff could perhaps address that issue of concern. Thank you.
Mr. Allen.
Thanks, Mayor. I presume that Ian Buck is still here, and we'll turn it over to him. Or should I turn it over to you, Matt?
I can take that one.
Okay.
So through CAO to Mayor and Council. So yeah, with regard to the letter received in the second notification period, that property is I guess it would be to the northeast of the proposal. The building's design does help with some of the privacy concerns. It has kind of a offset where the units closest to that property would be as far away from that property line as possible, while still fitting the building on the site. I guess further to that, just looking at the tree survey that was completed in support of this, there are some mature trees on the adjacent property that would help. So this is on still on private property. And they're of the size that may help screen some of the views from the newly proposed units, as well as the proposed trees, which of course would take some time to reach the size where they fully screen out the building, but they're also situated in a manner that would help with privacy.
Thanks very much. You know, there are times when we make trade-offs and compromises, and in this case, the reason why the building is going to a higher level is to accommodate council's desire for a pedestrian connector between Braidwood and Ryan Road, which I think is something that most of us supported, an important feature of this development. So unfortunately, if there is some downside, although mitigated by what Mr. Fitzgerald has indicated, I find myself, despite having some sympathy for the homes involved, still feeling that I will support the project given the overall benefit to the community. Thank you.
All right, thanks. And I don't see any further questions or comments. And so there was a subsidiary potential notice there, but that we did. So I guess, is there anything that we need to do other than poll council? Starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor. Councillor
Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Favor.
I'll be in favor as well. Excellent. All right, we don't have any notice of motion or new business, so we'll go right into bylaws.
Mayor, I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2977/2020, a bylaw to rezone property from commercial 2 zone C2 to comprehensive development zone 28 CD 28, 2355 Mansfield Drive, pass first and second reading.
Second that.
Excellent. Questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
Favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Excellent. And next bylaw.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm happy to move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2992/2020, which is a bylaw to rezone property to permit office use at 2459 Cousins Avenue, past first and second reading.
I'll second that.
Excellent. And are there any questions or comments regarding this? Seeing none, I'll poll council again, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
Favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. All right, and for third reading.
I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2990/2020, bylaw to amend zoning to develop a 118 unit rental apartment building with amenities at 1025 Ryan Road, past third reading.
Seconded.
Excellent. Any questions or comments regarding this one? Seeing none, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
In favor.
Councillor Frisch.
In favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
In favor.
Councillor Morin.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
And I'm in favor as well. Thanks very much. Next.
I'm happy to move this one if.
Oh, no, I've got it, Dave. Just
Okay,
getting
you got
my
it,
mute
yeah.
button. Thank you. Yeah, a little slow today. It's funny, you said at the beginning I was always prepared. There you go. So I will move the zoning amendment bylaw number 2999, 2020, receive third reading. And that is the bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 2500, 2007, to rezone property from residential 2 zone R2 to residential 2B zone R2B, to facilitate subdivision into 2 lots, 820 Urquhart Avenue.
I'll second that, even though I was going to do the one before it.
Excellent. I think we may have spoken, Mr. Erster could probably not. I think.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. 12.2.2, I think, on my agenda, I think was Councillor Theos's, but we can come back to that. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, let's loop back after.
Yeah, we'll do that. And we'll be all good. At this point, I'll poll council, starting with Councillor Cole Hamilton.
I'm in favor, thank you.
Councillor Frisch.
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
Favor.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'm in favor.
I'm in favor as well.
And you can read this one out, David. It sounds like you'd like to read this out, Councillor Frisch.
Oh, I love to read.
Go for it.
I'll move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2993, 2020, which is to rezone property from residential 1 to residential 1S to allow for a secondary suite at 1028 Aerosmith Ave, pass third reading.
I'll second that. All right.
If anybody's wondering how we got out of order, it's 7 o'clock. It's been a long day. And but with that, I do see Councillor Hillian does have a question or comment. So over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. We received some public feedback on this application today. And it indicated from the writer's perspective that the information that we received was different than the reality on the ground in relation to the positioning of the entrance to the suite, among other things. And I'm just wondering if staff have had an opportunity to look at that feedback and would care to comment on it, please.
I can, yeah, through the CAO to Mayor and Council. So yeah, I've seen the letter that we received during the, I guess in response to the notice to waive the public hearing. I think what you're referring to is the north arrow on the plans. Well, the plans or the floor plans for the proposed suite are correct. North arrow is backwards. It's facing the wrong way. So that's correct what they've outlined in their comments.
So where does that leave us, having debated this issue based on perhaps incomplete information?
Well, I guess to start on that one, I mean, when we're rezoning a property, we're looking at the land use. So many of the concerns they brought up were to do with privacy, new window locations, and patio locations. An addition on a house, and you know that wouldn't require any approval of council. Notwithstanding that, they're legitimate concerns, and you know they've now been submitted in response to the waiving of public hearing, be considered by council in proceeding with third reading or not proceeding with third.
Well, just speaking from my own perspective, I would appreciate the opportunity to think about this a little bit further and to hear a little bit further from staff in relation to the issues that have been presented. And I don't know whether that we have an option to do that, but given that we've waived the requirement for a public hearing, but we have this feedback which points out some contradictions. I'm just wondering if staff think it would be feasible to put it on a future agenda and perhaps take a second look at it with the information corrected.
Mr. Allen?
Yeah, I'll turn this over to Ian Buck just to weigh in on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think absolutely if council wants to defer the consideration, give a bit more time to think about it, that's fine. I do sort of concur with Mr. Fitzgerald that, you know, notwithstanding the error in the plans, we're dealing with the land use issue of a secondary suite. The design is a separate issue. The same homeowner could put an addition on their house with the similar features, just not a separate family living there along that same side of the house. But you know, I would absolutely recommend, if you have some discomfort, a motion to defer would be in order.
All right. Well, I'm going to look to council, and it looks like we're done. Councillor Hillian, did
Mayor, I don't know whether anybody else on council shares these reservations. I just have a hard time at you know, after a 3-hour meeting digesting all of this. I'm also handicapped in that I will be unable to attend the meeting on July 20th, unfortunately. I don't know whether, I mean, I don't necessarily want to see this defeated, but I would like the opportunity to consider it further. So I will move that we defer this to a future council meeting.
Second that.
All right, is there any discussion or comments regarding deferral? All right, seeing none, I'll pull council for deferral, starting with Councillor Cole-Hamilton.
I'll be in favor.
Councillor Frisch.
Opposed.
Councillor Hillian.
In favor.
Councillor McCollum.
Opposed.
Councillor Moran.
In favor.
Councillor Theos.
I'll be in favor of that.
And I'll be in favor as well. All right, we'll pass for deferral. And just to be clear, Councillor Hillian, I heard to a future meeting, but it didn't actually specify the 20th. Just going back, is that?
I have no preference on that, Mr. Mayor. I just appreciate the opportunity for it to be weighed when at a future date of staff choosing.
Fair enough, and just wanted to clarify that. Thanks, Councillor Hillian, and staff are okay with that? Simple nod, or yeah.
Point of order, Mayor. May I weigh in?
Sure. Yeah.
Just out of an interest of not holding up the proponent more than necessary, would it be possible just to say to the next meeting so that there's more time to consider it?
Yeah,
that is the next meeting.
Oh, okay. So it's obviously you're going to do the 20th then.
All right. So I'm going to look to staff. Is the 20th? Is that what you recorded, Mr. Richta?
Thank you, Mayor. I have recorded both dates as the discussion has evolved. Initially, I had until July 20th. And for clarification, rather than deferred, I use the word postpone.
Okay. All right. So it's going to come back on the 20th. Perfect. All right. Thanks for that clarification. Did we vote on that already? Now I'm starting to get a little.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I was like, we're discussing something after we actually voted on it, which is confusing enough. All right, well, there is only one thing left on the agenda.
Move adjournment.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed?
Have a great night, everybody.
That's a wrap.
Good night. Thanks,
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.